When a woman is sold like cattle in the dying light of a frontier town, one man's choice will ignite a war that burns across the mountains. They called it justice. They called it tradition. They called her unfit, dangerous, a stain to be hidden and sold to the highest bidder. But when Elias Crow rode into that cursed town square and saw what they'd done, saw the hooded figure trembling on that auction block, he made a choice that would shatter everything. This is their story, a story of survival, rebellion, and the brutal fight for freedom. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind carried dust and the smell of coming snow through the narrow streets of Ashford's Crossing, a town that seemed to exist only in the cracks between civilization and wilderness. Elias Crow felt it against his weathered face as his horse picked its way down the rutted main street, past buildings that leaned like drunks against each other, their paint long since surrendered to the elements. He hadn't planned to stop here, hadn't planned much of anything in the 3 years since Sarah died, if he was being honest. The cabin in the high country had become his entire world, a place where the silence didn't judge and the mountains didn't ask questions he couldn't answer. But supplies ran low, and even a ghost needed flour and coffee to get through the winter. The town square opened before him like a wound, and Elias felt his jaw tighten. A crowd had gathered, maybe 50 people forming a rough semicircle around a raised platform that had been hastily constructed from shipping crates and old lumber. The voices reached him first, jeering, laughing, ugly sounds that made something cold settle in his chest. "Come on now, gentlemen. Surely someone here has use for damaged goods." The auctioneer was a fat man in a vest that strained across his belly, sweat gleaming on his face despite the autumn chill. He gestured dramatically at the figure beside him, and Elias's hands tightened on the reins. She stood motionless on the platform, a burlap sack covering her head and most of her upper body, tied at the neck with rough rope. Her hands were bound in front of her, and even from this distance, Elias could see the tremor in her shoulders, the only sign of life from beneath that dehumanizing hood. "What the hell is this?" The words came out before he could stop them, low and dangerous. An old man beside him spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Justice, stranger. That there's Rowan Hale. Caused a lot of trouble for Mr. Garrett over at the Double G Ranch. Rejected his proposal, made accusations, stirred up the other women. Judge ruled her unfit for proper society. Now she's being offered for purchase, someone willing to take responsibility for her conduct." Elias stared at the old man, searching for any sign of shame or doubt in those rheumy eyes. He found none. "You're auctioning a woman, a human being. Ain't no one forcing nobody to buy, but she can't stay in town unmarried and unbeholden. Those are the rules. Mr. Garrett was kind enough to pay her keep these past months, but his patience has limits. This way, she gets a new start, and someone gets, The old man shrugged. "Well, whatever use they got for her." "We're down to $50, the auctioneer bellowed. $50 for a woman of working age. She's strong, I'm told. Good with animals. Someone here must need help around their property." The crowd's laughter had an edge of cruelty that made Elias's stomach turn. A young man near the front called out, "Take the hood off. Let us see what we're buying." Now, the auctioneer said, his jovial mask slipping for just a moment. "The hood stays on per the judge's order. The buyer can remove it once the transaction is complete. Part of the terms, gentlemen. She's marked, you understand. Some might find it unsettling." Marked. The word hung in the air like smoke. Elias had seen enough brutality in his 42 years to know exactly what that meant. Branding, scarring, disfigurement, punishments designed not just to hurt, but to mark someone as other, as less than. His hand moved unconsciously to the scar that ran along his own ribs, a gift from a Comanche lance that had nearly killed him 20 years ago. Pain he understood. Survival he understood. This was something else entirely. $40. The auctioneer's voice was getting desperate now. Surely she's worth $40 to someone. The crowd had gone quieter, the initial entertainment value wearing thin. A few men exchanged glances, but no one spoke. The woman on the platform hadn't moved, but Elias could see her chest rising and falling faster now, could almost feel her panic radiating through the burlap. "35! Someone give me 35! In the silence that followed, Elias heard the hammer of a gun being cocked somewhere in the crowd. Just a precaution, he supposed, in case the merchandise tried to run. The sound made his decision for him. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the packed earth with deliberate weight. The crowd parted as he walked forward, and he felt their eyes on him, assessing, judging, calculating. He didn't care. Hadn't cared what people thought since the fever took Sarah and left him with nothing but an empty cabin and a hole in his chest that wouldn't close. $35, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. I'll pay it. The auctioneer's face brightened like a man who'd just drawn a winning hand. $35. We have 35. Do I hear 40? $40, gentlemen. A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that belonged to someone used to getting his way. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his tailored coat to the gold watch chain glinting at his vest. I'll give you $100, the man said, and the crowd went completely silent. The auctioneer blinked. 100, Mr. Garrett? That's very generous, sir, but 100, Garrett repeated, his eyes fixed on Elias now. And I'll throw in another 50 for your trouble, Harold. This has gone on long enough. So this was Garrett, the ranch owner, the man who'd orchestrated this whole sick spectacle. Elias studied him, saw the possessiveness in the way he looked at the hooded figure, the barely contained rage simmering beneath that civilized exterior. 150, Elias said flatly. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Someone whistled low. That was more than most men in this town made in 6 months. It was also every cent Elias had left in the world, the last of what he'd saved from his years guiding wagon trains through the mountains. Garrett's jaw tightened. You don't even know what you're buying, stranger. She's been marked for a reason. Troublemaker. Liar. She made accusations against me that were proven false in a court of law. Proven? Elias kept his voice level, but his eyes never left Garrett's. Or bought. The temperature in the square seemed to drop 10 degrees. Garrett took a step forward, and Elias heard the subtle shift of men positioning themselves behind the ranch owner. Hired guns, probably, or loyal hands. He'd seen this dance before. You want to repeat that? Garrett's voice was soft, dangerous. I said $150. Elias pulled the worn leather purse from his coat and tossed it to the auctioneer, who caught it with fumbling hands. Count it. The auctioneer's fingers trembled as he opened the purse, spilling coins onto a small table beside the platform. Gold eagles, silver dollars, even some old Spanish reals, everything Elias owned that wasn't nailed down or growing in his garden. It's all here, Mr. Garrett. $150 exactly. Garrett's face had gone purple. For a long moment, Elias thought the man might actually draw on him right there in the town square. His hand hovered near his coat, where a pistol undoubtedly waited. But then something shifted. A calculation. A recognition that this wasn't the time or place. You're making a mistake, Garrett said quietly. She belongs to me. She's always belonged to me. A piece of paper doesn't change that. Then I guess we'll see, Elias replied. He turned his back on Garrett, a deliberate insult, a statement, and walked up the steps to the platform. The woman flinched as he approached, her bound hands rising instinctively to protect herself. The gesture hit him like a punch to the gut. Easy, he said, keeping his voice low and steady. I'm going to cut those ropes. Then we're going to walk to my horse and leave this place. Understand? No response. Just that trembling stillness beneath the sack. Elias drew his knife, a wicked blade he'd carried since his army days, and sawed through the ropes binding her wrists. The moment her hands were free, she clutched the burlap hood tighter around her neck, as if it were armor instead of a prison. The hood, the auctioneer started, reaching forward. The buyer has the right. The buyer says it stays on until we're away from here, Elias cut him off. He could feel Garrett's eyes boring into his back, could sense the violence coiling in the men behind him. Unless you want to dispute that. The auctioneer stepped back, shaking his head quickly. Elias turned to the woman, offering his hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she descended the platform steps on her own, moving with a careful precision that spoke of injured pride and stubborn dignity. He followed her down, staying close enough to intervene if someone tried something stupid. The crowd parted again, but this time the silence was different. tense, expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. Elias kept his hand near his Colt, his eyes scanning for threats. Garrett had moved to the edge of the square, surrounded by 4 men who looked like they knew which end of a gun was which. "This isn't over," Garrett called out as Elias helped the woman up onto his horse. "You hear me, stranger? You just made an enemy you can't afford." Elias swung up behind her, feeling her stiffen at the proximity. He gathered the reins with one hand, the other settling near his gun in plain sight. "I've had worse," he said simply. Then he turned the horse and rode out of Ashford's Crossing without looking back. The first hour passed in silence, broken only by the steady clop of hooves on the mountain trail and the wind rustling through pine branches overhead. The woman sat rigid in front of him, that damned hood still in place, her whole body radiating tension. Elias kept his distance as much as he could while sharing a saddle, focusing on the trail ahead and the sun sinking toward the western peaks. They were climbing now, following a path that wound through stands of aspen already gone gold with autumn. The air grew thinner and colder, carrying the scent of snow from the high country. In another few weeks, these passes would be impassable until spring, just as well. Winter isolation suited him fine. "We'll stop soon," he said, breaking the silence. "There's a stream about a mile ahead. Good place to camp." No response. He hadn't expected one. When they reached the clearing he'd remembered, a flat space beside a clear stream, sheltered by a rock overhang, Elias dismounted and offered his hand again. Again she ignored it, sliding down on her own and immediately putting distance between them. She moved to the far side of the clearing, her back to the rock face, and sank down with her knees drawn up to her chest. Elias set about making camp with practiced efficiency. He unsaddled the horse and let it drink, then gathered firewood from the surrounding forest. His hands knew the work: the arrangement of kindling, the spark of flint on steel, the careful building of flames. He'd done this 1,000 times, in 100 different places, back when he'd still believed the wilderness held answers instead of just more questions. "There's jerky in my saddlebag," he said, hanging a small pot of water over the fire. "Coffee too once this boils. You should eat something." Still no response. The hooded figure hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. For a moment, Elias wondered if she'd gone into shock, if he should try to check on her. But something about her posture, the set of her shoulders, the defensive curl of her body, told him she needed space more than she needed concern. So he made coffee, chewed his own jerky, and waited. The stars were coming out, bright and cold against the darkening sky, when she finally spoke. "Why?" The word was rough, like it had traveled over broken glass to reach the air. Elias looked up from the fire to find her still in the same position, still hooded, but her head had turned slightly toward him. "Why what? Why did you—" She stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "Why did you pay for me? What do you want?" Ah, there it was. The question he'd known was coming, the one he didn't have a good answer for. What did he want? Hell if he knew. He'd stopped wanting much of anything the day they buried Sarah. "Nothing," he said finally. "I don't want anything from you." Liar. The word came out flat, certain. Men always want something. That's all we are to them. Something to want, something to own, something to use up and throw away. Elias took a sip of his coffee, considering his words carefully. "I saw something happening in that town square that wasn't right. So I stopped it, that's all. For $150. She laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "That's not charity, mister. That's a purchase, and I know what men purchase women for. My cabin's about 8 hours' ride from here," Elias continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Remote. No neighbors for miles. I keep to myself up there. Hunt, fish, tend my garden. When we arrive, I'll give you food and a bed. In the morning, you're free to leave. I'll point you toward the nearest town that isn't Ashford's Crossing, give you enough supplies to get there. What you do after that is your business." Why, the silence that followed was different, confused, uncertain. "You expect me to believe that?" "Don't much care what you believe." Elias poured himself more coffee. "But that's the truth of it. I'm not Garrett. I'm not looking for a wife or a servant or whatever the hell else you might be thinking. I'm just a man who lives alone and prefers it that way." "Then why—" "Because what they were doing to you was wrong." He said it simply, stating a fact as plain as the color of the sky. And I had the means to stop it, so I did. She was quiet for a long time after that. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. An owl called somewhere in the forest, and Elias's horse nickered softly in response. "My name is Rowan," she said finally, so quiet he almost missed it. "Rowan Hale." "Elias Crow." He nodded toward the coffee pot. "You want some? It's not great, but it's hot." Another pause, then she rose slowly, moving like someone expecting a trap at any moment. She crossed the clearing with careful steps, staying just out of arm's reach as she took the tin cup he offered. Her hands were shaking. He could see it even in the firelight, but she managed to raise the cup to the gap at the bottom of the hood and drink. "Thank you," she whispered. "For the coffee or the rest of it?" "I don't know yet." "Fair enough." Elias settled back against his saddle, tipping his hat down over his eyes. "We'll leave at first light. Another full day's ride to the cabin. You should get some sleep." "I won't." Her voice was stronger now, more certain. "I haven't slept properly in... I don't remember how long." "Since Garrett?" "Since before Garrett." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "But yes, especially since him." Elias lifted his hat enough to look at her. "What happened, if you want to tell it?" "Why? So you can judge whether I deserved what they did to me?" "No. So I know what we might be facing when Garrett comes after you." "Because he will come. Men like that don't let go of what they think belongs to them." Rowan went very still. "You think he'll follow?" "I know he will. Question is whether it'll be tomorrow or next week." Elias sat up, his expression serious. "So I need to know what I'm dealing with. What did you do that made him hate you enough to have you sold like livestock in the town square?" The fire popped, sending shadows dancing across the clearing. When Rowan spoke again, her voice was steady, but Elias could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I said no." "To what?" "To everything." She hugged her knees tighter. "Garrett owns the Double G Ranch, biggest spread in 3 counties. Rich, powerful, used to getting his way. He wanted a wife to show off, to prove he could have anything and anyone. He chose me." "Chose you?" "The way you choose a horse or a new rifle. He made an offer to my father, a generous one. My father was in debt, struggling. Garrett promised to clear everything if I married him. My father said yes without asking me." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "And you?" "I refused. Said I'd rather starve than marry a man like him. Garrett didn't take it well. Started making threats, said he'd ruin my father, burn us out, make sure no one in the territory would hire us. When that didn't work, he tried other methods." The way she said it made Elias's blood run cold. "He hurt you." "He tried." There was something fierce in her voice now, something that hadn't been there before. "I fought back. Hard enough to leave marks, to make noise, to make sure everyone knew what he'd tried to do. So he changed tactics, started spreading rumors that I was unstable, dangerous, that I'd seduced him and then cried assault when he rejected me. His money bought him credibility. His lawyers bought him a judge, and his influence bought him that auction. And the hood? The marking." Rowan's hands went to the burlap, fingers tracing the rough fabric. "That's the part he enjoyed most. Making sure no one would want me after he was done. Making sure even if I escaped, I'd carry his mark forever." "Can I see?" Elias asked quietly. "No." "Rowan, I said no." The words came out sharp, final. "You bought my freedom, Crow. You didn't buy the right to see what he did to me." "Fair enough." Elias lay back down, adjusting his hat. "But if those marks are going to cause problems, infections, complications, I need to know. I'm no doctor, but I can clean wounds and stitch up most injuries. Comes from years on the frontier. I'll survive. I always do." She stood abruptly, moving back to her corner of the clearing. "And don't think this means I trust you. You might be better than Garrett, but that's a low bar to clear." "Wasn't asking for your trust." Elias closed his eyes. "Just telling you the truth. Sleep or don't sleep, your choice. But we're leaving at dawn either way." He heard her settle back against the rock, heard the rustle of fabric as she arranged herself. The fire burned lower and the temperature dropped. Elias lay still, listening to the night sounds of the forest, but his mind was working through possibilities and problems. Garrett would come. That was certain. Men like him didn't accept defeat, especially public defeat in front of the whole town. He'd bring men, good men with guns who wouldn't ask questions and wouldn't hesitate. The cabin was defensible, but Elias was just one man. If it came to a fight... Crow? Yeah? That money you spent. That was everything you had, wasn't it? He considered lying, decided against it. Yeah. So you're broke now, because of me. I've been broke before. I'll manage. Why? The question came again, but different this time. Not accusatory, just confused. Why would you do that for a stranger? For someone you've never even seen? Elias was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. 3 years ago, I had a wife, Sarah. She got sick, fever that wouldn't break. I did everything I could, but there wasn't enough medicine, wasn't enough time, wasn't enough of anything that mattered. She died in our cabin, in my arms, and I couldn't save her. He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. After that, I stopped seeing much point in things. The cabin felt empty. The world felt empty. I kept living because stopping seemed like more effort than continuing, but I wasn't really alive, just going through motions. And today? Today I saw someone who needed help, someone being hurt by people who should have protected her, and I realized I had a choice: walk away like I've been walking away from everything for 3 years, or actually do something that mattered. He shrugged, though she couldn't see it in the darkness. So I did. Not for you, really. For me. To prove I could still give a damn about something other than my own grief. The silence stretched out between them, but it felt different now. Less hostile, more contemplative. I'm sorry, Rowan said eventually. About your wife. Me too. And thank you. For giving a damn, even if it was for yourself. Elias smiled slightly in the darkness. Get some sleep, Rowan Hale. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. This time, she didn't argue. As the fire burned down to embers and the stars blazed overhead, Elias heard her breathing gradually slow and deepen. She'd fallen asleep after all, her exhaustion finally overcoming her fear. He stayed awake, keeping watch, his hand resting on his Colt. The mountains were beautiful in the moonlight, but they were also dangerous. Full of predators, both animal and human. And somewhere back in Ashford's Crossing, a man named Garrett was planning his next move. Elias knew how this would end, knew at the moment he'd thrown down that money in the town square. There would be blood before this was over. Violence and pain and possibly death. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt alive. And if that meant facing down Garrett and whatever hell he brought with him, then so be it. Elias had already lost everything that mattered. He had nothing left to lose, which made him the most dangerous kind of man there was. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of gold and pink, Elias kicked dirt over the dead fire and woke Rowan with a gentle call. She stirred, confused for a moment, then remembered where she was. The hood was still in place, but her movements were less guarded than they'd been the night before. Time to go, he said, offering her jerky and the last of the coffee. 8 more hours to the cabin, maybe less if we push. She accepted the food silently, eating while Elias saddled the horse and packed their meager camp. When everything was ready, she surprised him by accepting his hand to mount, though she was back to maintaining careful distance once they were riding. The trail climbed higher, winding through country that grew progressively more wild and remote. They passed above the tree line for a while, riding across alpine meadows where wildflowers still bloomed in defiance of the coming winter. Below them, valleys spread out in patchwork greens and golds, and above, the peaks stood eternal and indifferent. It's beautiful, Rowan said softly, the first word she'd spoken since they'd left camp. It is, Elias agreed. Unforgiving, but beautiful. Like everything worth having. He glanced at the hooded figure in front of him, surprised by the observation. You a philosopher, Miss Hale? Just someone who's learned that anything worth keeping you have to fight for, beauty included. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, and Elias found himself talking more than he had in months. He pointed out landmarks, shared stories about the animals that lived in these mountains, explained how to read weather signs in the clouds. Rowan listened, occasionally asking questions that showed a sharp mind behind that hood. By the time the sun was at its zenith, they'd crested the final ridge, and Elias pulled up his horse to give her a view of the valley below. "There," he said, pointing to a small structure nestled against a cliff face, smoke rising from its chimney. Home. It wasn't much. A single-room cabin built from pine logs, with a sod roof and a lean-to for animals. A creek ran nearby, and a small garden plot showed the stubble of harvested crops. But it was solid, isolated, and his. "You live here alone?" Rowan asked. "For the past 3 years. It must get lonely." "That's the idea." They descended into the valley as afternoon shadows began to lengthen. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was touching the western peaks, painting everything gold and amber. Elias dismounted and tied his horse, then turned to help Rowan down. This time, when she touched the ground, she didn't immediately pull away. Instead, she stood there, the hood turning as she took in her surroundings, the cabin, the mountains, the vast sky overhead. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias stepped past her and opened the cabin door, gesturing inside. "Now we get you settled. Food, rest, whatever you need. Tomorrow, if you want to leave, I'll show you the way to Timber Ridge. It's about 20 miles south, big enough to disappear in, far enough from Garrett's influence that you might be safe." "Might be? That's the best I can offer." Rowan stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly reached up to the rope at her neck. Her fingers fumbled with the knot, and Elias saw her hesitate. A lifetime of fear and shame warring with something else. Hope, maybe, or just desperate need to be seen as human again. "Help me," she whispered. "Please. I want this off." Elias moved to her carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. His fingers found the knot and loosened it, then gently lifted the burlap hood away. What he saw made his breath catch. Rowan Hale was beautiful, not in the soft, conventional way, but in the fierce, unbroken way of something forged in fire. Her face was angular and strong, her skin marked by sun and hardship. But it was her eyes that caught him first. One a startling green, the other a deep brown, mismatched and magnificent. Her dark hair was cropped short, ragged, like it had been hacked off without care, and across her left cheek, from temple to jaw, ran a brand. The letter G burned into her skin, still red and angry despite the weeks of healing. Elias's hands clenched into fists, rage flooding through him so hot and sudden it nearly stole his breath. Garrett hadn't just hurt her. He'd marked her like cattle, claimed her like property, tried to write his ownership into her very flesh. "Now you see," Rowan said, her voice brittle. "Now you understand why the hood, why the shame. I'm damaged goods, Crow. Marked, ruined." He forced himself to breathe, to think past the fury. "You're none of those things. You're a survivor, and Garrett's mark doesn't define you. It defines him, shows exactly what kind of monster he is." Pretty words. She touched the brand gently, wincing. "But words don't change what people see when they look at me." "Then they're looking wrong." Elias met her mismatched eyes steadily. "I see someone strong enough to endure hell and still be standing. That's not nothing." For the first time since he'd bought her freedom, Rowan smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. "You're either very kind or very foolish, Elias Crow." "Probably both." He stepped back, giving her space. "Come inside. Let's get some food in you and we can figure out the rest tomorrow." As Rowan walked into the cabin, her head held high despite everything, Elias turned to scan the valley one more time. The sun had set now, and darkness was creeping up from the lowlands. Somewhere out there, Garrett was coming. But here, in this small circle of lamplight and warmth, a woman who'd been treated as less than human was taking her first free breath in months. And Elias Crow was remembering what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. The war was coming. Let it come. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, simple and clean. Rowan stood just inside the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the dim lamplight as she took in her surroundings. It was sparse, A single room with a stone fireplace on one wall, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, a bed in the corner covered with heavy quilts, and shelves lined with supplies and tools. A second, smaller bed frame sat empty against the far wall, its bare boards gathering dust. "Sarah's sewing corner," Elias said quietly, noticing where her gaze had landed. He moved past her to light another lamp. "I haven't had the heart to move it. Keeps the space from feeling too empty, I suppose." Rowan turned slowly, drinking in details. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. A rifle rested above the door. Everything had its place, ordered and maintained with the care of someone who lived alone and had nothing but time. "It's peaceful," she said finally. "It is." Elias busied himself at the fireplace, building up the fire and hanging a pot of water. "Sit. You must be exhausted." She wanted to argue, to maintain the distance that had kept her alive these past months, but her legs were trembling from the long ride and her body ached. She sank into one of the chairs, her fingers unconsciously moving to the brand on her cheek. The habit was ingrained now, touching it, checking it, as if the mark might have disappeared while she wasn't looking. Elias pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from a shelf and set it on the table. When he unwrapped it, she saw dried meat, hard cheese, and a half loaf of dark bread. "Not fancy, but it'll fill your belly. There's stew in the pot. Won't take long to heat." "You don't have to do this," Rowan said, even as her stomach growled at the sight of real food. "Do what?" "Feed me. Take care of me. You said I was free to leave in the morning, so why waste your supplies on someone who won't be here tomorrow?" Elias cut a thick slice of bread and pushed it toward her. "Because you're here tonight, and no one under my roof goes hungry." He paused, then added, "Besides, who says you're leaving tomorrow?" "You did." "I said you were free to leave, didn't say you had to." He turned back to the fire, stirring the pot. "But that's your choice to make, not mine." Rowan picked up the bread, tearing off a small piece. It was coarse and heavy, the kind that stuck to your ribs and lasted through hard winters. She chewed slowly, watching Elias move around the cabin with practiced ease. His movements were economical, no wasted motion, the habits of a man who'd been taking care of himself for a long time. "Why don't you have neighbors?" she asked. "Most homesteaders want someone close by. For help, for company." "Most homesteaders aren't trying to forget." He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and set it before her, chunks of venison in thick gravy, potatoes, carrots. Steam rose from it, carrying the smell of rosemary and salt. "After Sarah died, I found I preferred the company of mountains to people. Mountains don't ask questions, don't judge, don't expect anything from you except respect." "That sounds lonely." "It is, but lonely beats the alternative." He poured himself coffee and sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "Eat. You need your strength." She wanted to resist, to prove she didn't need his charity or his kindness, but the stew was right there and her body was screaming for sustenance. She ate, trying to maintain some dignity even as she shoveled food into her mouth like a starving animal. Elias didn't comment, didn't watch her with pity or disgust. He simply drank his coffee and stared into the fire, giving her the privacy to be hungry without shame. When she'd finished, he took her bowl without a word and refilled it. This time she ate slower, and as her immediate hunger faded, her mind sharpened. Questions rose up, practical ones she couldn't ignore. "What happens when Garrett comes?" Elias set down his cup. "You believe he will?" "I know he will. The question is whether you're ready for it." "I've held this cabin against worse than an angry rancher and his hired guns." He gestured to the rifle above the door, then to another propped in the corner, and a shotgun hanging on pegs near the window. "I'm no gunfighter, but I can shoot straight, and I know this land better than any man alive. They'll have to come up that valley single file, exposed the whole way. I'll see them long before they see me." Rowan shook her head. "You don't understand. Garrett doesn't just have guns, he has the law. He'll bring a sheriff, maybe a judge. He'll have papers saying I belong to him, that the auction was legal and binding. He'll make it look legitimate right up until the moment he puts a bullet in you and drags me back. Then we make sure the papers don't matter." Elias leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Tell me something, Rowan. Do you want to fight him, really fight him, or do you want to run and hope he doesn't follow?" The question hit her like a slap. She sat back, her hand moving to the brand again. I don't know. I've been running in my head for so long, I don't know if I have any fight left. Yes, you do. His voice was quiet but certain. I saw it in that town square. The way you stood on that platform, bound and hooded and terrified. But you didn't break. Didn't beg. That takes fight, Rowan. More fight than most people have in them. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to know when I was beaten. Same thing sometimes. He stood and moved to a trunk at the foot of the empty bed frame, pulling out a folded quilt. You can have the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. No. She stood too, her voice firm. You've given me enough. I'll take the floor. Like hell you will. You're injured, exhausted, and you've been through more trauma in the past few months than most people see in a lifetime. Take the bed, Rowan. That's not a request. They stared at each other across the cabin, two stubborn people neither willing to back down. Finally, Rowan crossed her arms. Fine. But tomorrow I start earning my keep. If I'm staying, even for a day, I'm not doing it as your charity case. Fair enough. He tossed her the quilt. There's a basin and pitcher on the shelf. Water's clean. If you need privacy, I'll step outside. I'm fine. She caught the quilt, then hesitated. Crow? Elias. Just Elias. Elias? The name felt strange on her tongue, too personal, too human. Why are you being so decent to me? And don't give me that line about stopping cruelty. There's more to it than that. He was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. When Sarah was dying, I begged every person I could find for help. Doctors, medicine men, even a traveling preacher. Most of them wouldn't come. Too far, too dangerous, too poor a prospect for payment. The few who did couldn't do anything. She died alone except for me, in pain, calling for her mother. He met Rowan's eyes. So now when I see someone who needs help, someone who's suffering, I help. Because I know what it's like to be the one begging, and I know what it's like when no one comes. Rowan's throat tightened. I'm sorry for all of it. So am I. He moved toward the door, grabbing his coat. I'll check the perimeter, make sure we're secure. Get some rest. He slipped outside and Rowan was alone in the cabin. She stood there for a moment, the quilt clutched in her hands, feeling the warmth of the fire on her face and the safety of solid walls around her. It had been so long since she'd felt safe, so long since she'd been treated like a person instead of property. She moved to the basin and splashed cold water on her face, careful around the brand. It still hurt, a constant ache that flared to sharp pain when touched. She'd tried to keep it clean in the weeks since Garrett had done it, but infection had set in twice, leaving her feverish and delirious in that small cell under the courthouse. Only the stubborn will to survive had pulled her through. Looking at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the basin, she barely recognized herself. The mismatched eyes stared back, one green like spring grass, one brown like rich earth, a quirk of birth that had always made her feel different, other. Her mother had called them special, had said they meant Rowan could see the world in ways others couldn't. Her father had called them unmarketable, had said they'd make finding a husband difficult. Garrett had called them fascinating, right before he'd held her down and pressed the branding iron to her face. She turned away from the mirror, unable to look anymore. The bed called to her, soft and clean, but she hesitated. Beds meant vulnerability. Beds meant letting your guard down. In the months since Garrett had started his campaign against her, she'd learned to sleep sitting up, back to a wall, always ready to run or fight. But exhaustion was a weight she couldn't carry anymore. She sank onto the mattress, real straw and feathers, not moldy hay, and pulled the quilt over herself. The smell of cedar and lavender rose from the fabric. Sarah's scent, maybe, or just the smell of a home that had once held love. Outside, she heard Elias moving around the cabin, his boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. He was checking the perimeter like he'd said, making sure they were secure, protecting her, even though he didn't owe her anything, even though she was a stranger who'd brought nothing but trouble into his isolated world. The door opened softly, and Elias slipped back inside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He moved quietly, banking the fire and arranging his bedroll near the hearth. Rowan watched him through slitted eyes, pretending to sleep, observing the way he moved with military precision, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. "I know you're awake," he said without turning around. Rowan's eyes opened fully. "How?" "You're breathing. It's too controlled." He settled onto his bedroll, his back to her. "It's all right. First night in a strange place, strange man nearby. You'd be a fool to trust easily." "I've been a fool before. It didn't end well." "Then we'll both stay vigilant." He adjusted his gun belt, keeping his Colt within easy reach. "Sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." "You can't stay awake all night." "I've done worse." Rowan turned onto her side, facing the wall, the quilt pulled tight around her. "Elias?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For all of it, even if I don't understand it." "Nothing to understand. Now sleep." She closed her eyes, and this time, despite everything, sleep came. It wasn't peaceful. Her dreams were full of fire and iron, of Garrett's face and the jeering crowd. But it was sleep. And in the morning, when she woke to the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee, she realized she'd made it through the night without waking once in terror. That alone felt like a miracle. Elias was at the stove, working a cast-iron skillet with practiced hands. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything gold. "Morning," he said without looking up. "There's coffee on the table. Breakfast in 5 minutes." Rowan sat up slowly, her body protesting. Every muscle ached from the long ride, and the brand on her face throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. She poured herself coffee and sipped it, watching Elias cook. He moved with the same economical grace as the night before, no wasted motion, everything done with purpose. "You said I could earn my keep," she said. "What needs doing?" "Garden needs to be cleared and prepared for winter. Firewood needs splitting. There's a fence line that needs mending before the first snow." He slid eggs and bacon onto 2 plates, adding a thick slice of fried bread to each. "But first, you eat. Can't work on an empty stomach." They ate in comfortable silence, and Rowan found herself relaxing despite her determination to stay guarded. There was something about Elias that was inherently trustworthy, not in a naive way, but in the way of a man who'd seen the worst of the world and chosen to be decent anyway. After breakfast, he showed her around the small homestead. The garden was a good size, already harvested but needing to be turned and mulched. The woodpile was low. They'd need at least 3 cords to make it through winter. A small shed housed tools, traps, and preserved foods. Behind the cabin, a natural spring fed into a cistern he'd built, providing fresh water year-round. "You built all this yourself?" Rowan asked, impressed despite herself. "Most of it. Sarah helped with the garden and the cabin interior. We had plans for more. A proper barn, maybe some chickens, a few head of cattle." He stared out at the valley, his expression distant. "But then she got sick, and plans don't mean much when you're digging a grave on a hillside." Rowan followed his gaze and saw it. A small plot on a rise overlooking the valley, a simple wooden cross marking the spot. Fresh wildflowers lay at its base, recently placed. "You still bring her flowers?" "Every few days. Seems wrong not to." He shook himself as if dispelling the memories. "Come on, I'll show you how to split wood properly. You'll take the skin off your hands if you don't know what you're doing." The next few hours passed in a blur of physical labor. Elias was a patient teacher, showing her the right angle to strike, how to read the grain of the wood, where to place her hands for maximum leverage. Rowan's arms burned and her hands blistered, but she refused to stop. This was useful. This was something she could control. They worked side by side, the rhythm of splitting wood becoming almost meditative. Thunk, crack, split, thunk, crack, split. The pile grew steadily, and with it, Rowan felt something inside her beginning to unknot. Here, in this isolated valley, doing honest work beside a decent man, she could almost forget Garrett and the brand on her face, and the fear that had been her constant companion. Almost. "Riders," Elias said suddenly, his hand moving to the rifle he'd propped against the woodpile. 3 of them, coming up from the south trail. Rowan's blood went cold. She turned to where he was looking and saw them, distant figures on horseback climbing the switchbacks that led to the valley. Even from here she could see they were armed, could see the deliberate way they moved. "Inside," Elias said, his voice calm but commanding. "Now." "If it's Garrett," "Inside, Rowan. Let me handle this." She wanted to argue, wanted to stand and fight, but years of survival instinct kicked in. She ran for the cabin, her heart hammering, while Elias took up a position behind the woodpile, his rifle resting easy in his hands. He looked different now, not the gentle homesteader, but something harder, something forged in old violence. From the cabin window, Rowan watched the riders approach. As they got closer, she could make out details: good horses, expensive tack, guns worn openly. But the lead rider wasn't Garrett. It was a woman, older, riding with the confidence of someone who knew these mountains well. "Stand easy, Elias Crow," the woman called out when they were within earshot. "It's just Martha Gaines and her boys. We mean no harm." Elias lowered his rifle slightly but didn't put it down. "Martha, didn't expect to see you up this way." The woman reined in her horse about 20 feet from the cabin, her sons flanking her. She was in her 60s, weather-worn and capable, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Heard some interesting news out of Ashford's Crossing. Thought I'd come see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That you bought yourself a wife at auction. That you threw down a fortune and walked out with Rowan Hale under Garrett's nose." Martha's eyes found Rowan at the window. "Looks like the rumors were right." Elias glanced back at the cabin, then returned his attention to Martha. "What's it to you?" "Nothing, if you're treating her right. Everything, if you're not." Martha dismounted slowly, her joints protesting. "Rowan and I go back. Her mother was my friend before the consumption took her. I owe her family a debt." Rowan opened the cabin door and stepped out, her chin raised despite the fear coursing through her. "Martha Gaines, I thought you were in Wyoming." "Was. Came back last month to settle my sister's estate." Martha's eyes softened when she saw the brand on Rowan's face. "Sweet mercy, child. He really did it, didn't he? Marked you like an animal." "He did a lot of things." Rowan's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "What do you want, Martha?" "To make sure you're all right, and to warn you, Garrett's gathering men. He's coming for you, Rowan. Maybe as soon as tomorrow." Martha turned to Elias. "You understand what you've gotten yourself into, Crow? Garrett Thornton owns half this territory. He's got judges in his pocket, sheriffs on his payroll, and enough guns to start a small war. You can't fight him alone." "Then I guess I'll die trying," Elias said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. "You're a fool." "Been called worse." Martha studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You might just be the right kind of fool, but you'll need help." She gestured to her sons. "This is Thomas and James. They're handy in a fight, and they owe Garrett nothing. If you're willing, we'll stand with you." Elias looked at Rowan, raising an eyebrow in question. She understood. This was her choice to make. Her fight or her flight. She thought about running again, about taking the supplies Elias had offered and disappearing into some distant town where Garrett's reach couldn't find her. It would be safer, smarter. The logical choice for someone who'd already lost so much. But then she thought about her sister, Clara. 15 years old and still trapped on Garrett's ranch, still under his control. She thought about the other women Garrett had hurt, the ones too afraid to speak up, the ones who'd learned to make themselves small and quiet and invisible. She thought about the brand on her face and what it represented. Not just Garrett's cruelty, but every man who thought women were property to be owned and marked and discarded. "I'm done running," she said quietly. "If Garrett wants a fight, he'll get one." Martha smiled, fierce and proud. "That's Mary Hale's daughter, all right. Your mama would be proud." "My mama would tell me to run and not look back." "True, but she'd be proud anyway." Martha turned to her sons. "Boys, start unloading. We've got work to do before Garrett arrives." The next hours were a flurry of preparation. Martha's sons, both in their 30s, hard men who moved like former soldiers, helped Elias reinforce the cabin's defenses. They blocked windows with heavy shutters fitted with gun ports, stockpiled ammunition, and positioned barrels of water inside in case of fire. Martha worked with Rowan, teaching her how to load and fire Elias's spare rifle. "You ever killed a man?" Martha asked bluntly. "No." "Good. Means you're not broken yet. But if it comes to it, if Garrett or his men get close enough that it's you or them, don't hesitate. A hesitation is how you die." Rowan nodded, her hand steady on the rifle despite her racing heart. "I understand. Do you?" Martha's eyes were knowing. "Killing changes you, child. Even when it's righteous, even when it's necessary, it takes something from you, makes you harder, colder. You sure you want that weight? I want to live. I want my sister to live. If that means becoming hard and cold, so be it. Martha squeezed her shoulder. Then we'll make sure you survive this. And after, we'll make sure you remember how to be soft again when it matters. As the sun began to set, Elias called them all together. They gathered around the table, 5 people preparing to defend against unknown numbers, unknown tactics, but known hatred. If they come tonight, they'll wait until full dark, Elias said, spreading a rough map of the valley on the table. Best approach is up this southern trail. It's the widest and offers the most cover. But there are 2 other routes, he pointed to marks on the map. Eastern Ridge here, and the creek bed to the west, both harder to navigate but possible for determined men. Thomas leaned forward, studying the map. We can't defend all 3 approaches with 5 people. No, but we can watch them. I'll take the southern trail. It's the most likely. Thomas, you take the eastern ridge. James, the creek bed. Martha, you and Rowan stay here. Central position, ready to reinforce wherever they hit first. What if they split their forces? Rowan asked. Then we adapt. But I don't think they will. Garrett's not a tactician. He's a bully. He'll want to come straight at us, overwhelming force, make a statement. And if he brings the law? Elias's jaw tightened. Then we make the law understand that some things are worth fighting for, legal or not. They took their positions as darkness fell. Elias moved out into the night with his rifle, disappearing into the shadows like he'd been born to them. The sons followed, spreading out to their assigned posts. Inside the cabin, Rowan and Martha waited, rifles loaded, ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Every creak of settling wood, every rustle of wind through pines, set Rowan's heart racing. Beside her, Martha sat calm and still, the patience of someone who'd lived through worse and survived. Tell me about Clara, Martha said quietly. How bad is it? Rowan's hands tightened on her rifle. Bad. When I refused Garrett, he started using her as leverage. Nothing direct, just making sure I knew she was there, that he could reach her any time he wanted. After the trial, after they locked me up, I heard he'd moved her into the main house. Told everyone she was his ward, that he was looking after her because her family couldn't. You think he's touched her? I think he's waiting, using her to draw me back, to make me compliant. He knows I'd do anything to keep her safe. Rowan's voice cracked. That's why I can't run, Martha. Even if we survive tonight, even if we somehow drive Garrett off, Clara's still there, still in his house, still in his power. Then we'll get her out. How? He's got guards, lawyers, the whole county backing him. We'll find a way. Martha's voice was steel. Your mother saved my life once, back when we were girls, pulled me out of a frozen river when I fell through the ice. I swore I'd pay that debt, and I will. We get you safe first, then we get Clara. Before Rowan could respond, a whistle cut through the night. 3 short bursts. Elias's signal. Someone was coming. Martha moved to the window, her rifle at the ready. Stay low. Remember what I taught you. Aim for center mass, squeeze, don't pull, and keep shooting until they stop moving. Rowan's mouth went dry. She positioned herself at the opposite window, her rifle barrel resting on the sill. Outside, the moonlight painted the valley in silver and shadow. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then she saw them. Figures on horseback, maybe 6 or 7, moving up the southern trail in single file. Too far to identify faces, but close enough to see the glint of moonlight on gun barrels. A rifle shot cracked the silence, and one of the riders jerked in his saddle. Elias, from his position somewhere in the darkness. The riders scattered, seeking cover, and return fire lit up the night in muzzle flashes. Hold, Martha said calmly. Let them get closer. Make every shot count. The riders regrouped and charged forward, spurring their horses up the trail. More shots from Elias. Another rider went down. But they kept coming, and now Rowan could hear them shouting, could hear the rage in their voices. Now, Martha said, and fired. Rowan sighted down her barrel at a rider breaking left, squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the smoke she saw the man tumble from his horse. She'd hit him. She'd actually hit him. There was no time to process, no time to feel. She worked the lever, ejected the spent cartridge, chambered another round, and fired again. And again. The cabin filled with smoke and noise, and outside men were screaming, horses were screaming, and the night had become a hell of gunfire and violence. A bullet punched through the shutter beside Rowan's head, showering her with splinters. She ducked, heart hammering, then popped back up and fired at the shooter. He dropped, and she didn't let herself think about whether he was dead or just wounded. "They're falling back," Martha shouted over the chaos. "Keep pressure on them." But as quickly as it had started, the attack ended. The riders retreated down the trail, leaving 2 bodies behind and taking their wounded. In the sudden silence, Rowan's ears rang and her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the rifle. "You did good," Martha said, her own breathing heavy. "Real good, child." Elias appeared at the door, his rifle smoking. "Everyone all right?" "We're fine," Martha confirmed. "You?" "Took a graze on my arm, nothing serious." He moved to the window, scanning the darkness. "That was a probe testing our defenses. They'll be back, and next time they'll be smarter about it." "How many did we get?" 3 down for certain, maybe 2 wounded, but I counted 8 riders total. That means Garrett still got 5 guns out there, plus himself. Elias reloaded his rifle with practiced efficiency. "We hurt them, but we didn't stop them." Rowan set down her rifle and moved to the basin, splashing cold water on her face. Her hands came away trembling, and she realized there was blood on them, splatter from the man she'd shot, or maybe her own from where splinters had cut her cheek. She couldn't tell, couldn't think straight. "First time's the hardest," Martha said gently, appearing beside her with a cloth. "It gets easier. Not better, but easier." "I don't want it to get easier." Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to be the kind of person who finds killing easy." "Then hold on to that feeling. It means you're still human." Martha cleaned the blood from Rowan's face with gentle efficiency. "But don't let it paralyze you. We're not done yet." She was right. As the night wore on, the attacks came again, twice more before dawn. Each time the riders probed different approaches, testing for weaknesses. Each time Elias and his makeshift defenders drove them back. But ammunition was running low, exhaustion was setting in, and everyone knew they couldn't hold forever. As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky, a white flag appeared on the southern trail. A single rider approached slowly, hands raised, a piece of torn shirt tied to his rifle barrel. Elias stepped out onto the cabin porch, his rifle trained on the rider. "That's close enough. State your business." The rider stopped 30 feet out. He was young, barely 20, with fear written plain on his face. "Mr. Garrett wants to parley, says he's willing to discuss terms." "What terms?" "He'll let you live if you hand over the woman. Says this doesn't have to end in more blood." Elias laughed, harsh and bitter. "He murders 3 of his own men trying to take her by force, and now he wants to talk terms? Tell Garrett he can go to hell." "Please, mister," the young rider's voice cracked. "He'll kill me if I come back without an answer. Just listen to what he has to say." 5 minutes, that's all he's asking." Elias looked back at the cabin, where Rowan stood in the doorway. She nodded once, her face set with determination. Whatever Garrett had to say, they'd hear him out, if only to buy time to think, to plan, to figure out how they were going to survive what came next. 5 minutes, Elias said. "He comes alone, unarmed, to the edge of the clearing. Any tricks, and he dies first. You understand?" The young rider nodded frantically and wheeled his horse around, galloping back down the trail. Minutes later, another rider appeared, older, confident, sitting his horse like he owned the world. Garrett Thornton had come to negotiate, and Rowan Hale realized the real battle was just beginning. Garrett Thornton dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no in his life. He was tall, well-built, with silver threading through his dark hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone who'd profited handsomely from other people's suffering. His face was handsome in a cruel way, all sharp angles and cold eyes that assessed everything with the calculating gaze of a predator. He walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty, stopping at the edge of the clearing exactly where Elias had specified. A faint smile played at his lips, like this was all some amusing game he was destined to win. "Elias Crow," Garrett said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I've heard about you. Mountainman, Former scout, widower, living alone in the high country. You've built yourself quite a reputation for someone who claims to want solitude. You've got 4 minutes left, Elias replied, his rifle never wavering from Garrett's chest. Say what you came to say. Garrett's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. I'm a reasonable man, Crow. Despite what Rowan may have told you, I'm not a monster. I'm simply a businessman trying to reclaim what's legally mine. From the cabin doorway, Rowan felt rage ignite in her chest like a physical flame. She stepped out onto the porch, ignoring Martha's hand on her arm, trying to hold her back. I'm not property, Garrett. I never was, no matter what your bought judge declared. Garrett's gaze shifted to her, and something predatory flickered across his face when he saw the brand on her cheek. Rowan, I see you've finally shown your face. Does it hurt? I hope so. I want you to remember every day what happens when you defy me. I remember plenty, Rowan shot back, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I remember you forcing yourself on me. I remember you threatening my sister. I remember you turning an entire town against me because your ego couldn't handle rejection. Lies. Garrett's voice hardened. All lies, as the court determined. You tried to seduce me, and when I refused you, you created a fantasy to destroy my reputation. The judge saw through your manipulation. The whole town saw through it. The judge saw your money, Elias interjected. Just like everyone else in Ashford's Crossing. How much did it cost you, Garrett? How much to buy a court, to buy a town's silence? Garrett turned his attention back to Elias, and the pretense of civility began to crack. You don't know what you're dealing with, Crow. That woman is a liar, a manipulator, and dangerous. I was trying to help her family when she threw herself at me, and when I rejected her advances, she turned vicious. Everything I've done has been within the bounds of law. Law you purchased. Law is law, regardless of how it's enforced. Garrett's hand moved slightly, a gesture that made Elias's finger tighten on his trigger. But I didn't come here to debate jurisprudence. I came to offer you a way out. You're a smart man, Crow. You know you can't win this. I have 20 men camped down the mountain. I have the county sheriff and 2 federal marshals arriving tomorrow with legal papers ordering you to surrender Rowan to my custody. I have resources you can't imagine and reach you can't escape. And yet here you are, negotiating instead of taking, Elias observed, which means you're not as strong as you pretend. Something dangerous flashed in Garrett's eyes. I'm offering you mercy. Walk away now, keep your life and your cabin. I'll even pay you for your trouble, say $200 for the inconvenience. All you have to do is hand over what's mine and forget this ever happened. She's not yours to take. The law says otherwise. I paid for her fair and square at that auction. $150 changed hands, witnessed by the whole town. She belongs to me now, Crow. You know it, I know it, and when the marshals arrive, they'll know it too. Rowan felt sick. He was right about the legal technicalities, right about the power he wielded. In this territory, in this time, men like Garrett wrote the rules and enforced them with money and violence. Fighting him meant fighting the entire corrupt system he'd built around himself. But then Elias spoke, and his words changed everything. Actually, the law says otherwise. Rowan Hale is no longer available for purchase or transfer. As of last night, she became Rowan Crow, my wife, which means she's under my protection, and no court in this territory can take a man's wife from him without his consent. The words hit Rowan like a physical blow. She stared at Elias's back, trying to process what he'd just said. Wife. He'd called her his wife, but they'd never discussed marriage, never even considered it. This was a legal maneuver, nothing more, but the weight of it settled on her shoulders like a cloak. Garrett's face went purple with rage. You married her. That's impossible. There's no preacher within 50 miles, no legal authority to perform a ceremony. Martha Gaines is a legally ordained minister, Elias interrupted calmly. Has been for 15 years. She performed the ceremony last night, properly witnessed by her sons. The papers are filed, legal and binding. So unless you want to challenge a legal marriage in court, which would require you to admit you were trying to purchase another man's wife, I suggest you take your men and leave my property. Martha stepped out onto the porch, a satisfied smile on her weathered face. It's true, Garrett. I married them myself, proper and legal. You can check the county records if you like, assuming you can get there before the papers are processed. The lie was smooth, practiced, and completely believable. Rowan understood immediately what they'd done. Created a legal fiction to protect her, bound her to Elias through paperwork and witnesses in a way that even Garrett's corrupt system would have trouble undoing. It was brilliant and desperate and utterly insane. Garrett's hand moved toward his coat, and Elias's rifle snapped up. "Don't!" "You think you're clever," Garrett hissed, his composure finally shattering. "You think you've outmaneuvered me with your fake marriage and your mountain fortress, but I will have her back, Crow. If not today, then tomorrow. If not through law, then through force. She's mine. She's always been mine, and a piece of paper doesn't change that. Then you'll have to go through me." Elias's voice was quiet, deadly. "And I promise you, Garrett, I'm a lot harder to kill than you think." "We'll see." Garrett turned and strode back toward his horse, his movements tight with barely controlled fury. As he mounted, he called back, "You've made your choice, Crow. When you're buried on this mountain next to your precious Sarah, remember that you brought this on yourself. And Rowan?" He fixed her with a gaze full of dark promise. "When I take you back, and I will take you back, you'll wish you'd died in that auction square. What I did to your face will seem like kindness compared to what's coming." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, leaving a silence that rang with unspoken threats. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, his shoulders tense. "Well, that went about as badly as expected." "You married me," Rowan said, her voice hollow. "You told him we were married." "I gave you legal protection," Elias corrected, not looking at her. "Nothing more. When this is over, when Garrett's dealt with, we can annul it. It's just paper, Rowan, just words to keep you safe. Just words that might get you killed. Maybe." He finally turned to face her, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of what he'd just committed to. "But I've been dead inside for 3 years. Might as well make it official if it means something good comes from it." Martha stepped between them, her expression serious. "What's done is done. Now we need to prepare for what comes next. Garrett's not going to wait for marshals or legal proceedings. He'll come tonight with everything he has, and he'll come to kill." Thomas and James emerged from their positions, both looking grim. "She's right," Thomas said. "I counted at least 15 men in that camp, maybe more. They're well-armed, organized, and angry about the men we killed last night. This is going to be a siege, not a skirmish." Elias nodded, his tactical mind already working through scenarios. "Then we need to make this cabin into a fortress. James, I need you to rig traps on the southern approach, anything that'll slow them down or make noise when they trigger it. Thomas, help me reinforce the north wall. That's our weak point. Martha, inventory our ammunition and supplies. We need to know exactly what we're working with." "What about me?" Rowan asked. Elias met her eyes, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Not pity, not protection, but respect. "You're going to help me build a fallback position. If they breach the cabin, we need somewhere to retreat to, somewhere we can hold out until help arrives or they give up." "What help? There's no one else coming." "Maybe not, but we fight like there is anyway." He grabbed a shovel from the lean-to. "Come on, we've got work to do and not much time to do it." The hours that followed were a blur of frantic preparation. They dug a defensive trench behind the cabin, using the natural rock face as a backstop and piling stones to create firing positions. They stockpiled weapons and ammunition in multiple locations so they wouldn't be left helpless if one position was overrun. They filled every container with water and moved all the food stores to the reinforced root cellar beneath the cabin floor. As they worked, Rowan found herself watching Elias with new eyes. This wasn't just a grieving widower playing at heroism. This was a man who'd seen war, who understood violence and tactics and the grim calculus of survival. His movements were economical, his decisions quick and sure, and he worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what was coming and was determined to meet it prepared. "You were military," she said as they hauled stones into position. "Not just a scout." "Captain in the territorial militia during the Indian conflicts," he confirmed. "Led 50 men through some of the bloodiest fighting this territory's seen. Lost half of them before it was over." He set down a heavy rock and wiped sweat from his brow. "That's where I met Sarah. She was a nurse at the fort, tending to wounded soldiers. I was recovering from a lance wound that should have killed me. She saved my life, and I fell in love with her while she was changing my bandages and telling me I was the worst patient she'd ever had. She sounds wonderful. She was. His voice softened. Strong, stubborn, compassionate. She saw the good in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. When the fighting ended, I left the military and brought her up here. Wanted to build something peaceful, something clean, wanted to leave the violence behind. He laughed bitterly. Guess violence doesn't leave you behind that easily. You didn't have to do this, Rowan said quietly. Didn't have to marry me or fight for me or risk everything. You could have given me supplies and directions like you promised and gone back to your peaceful life. What life? Elias turned to face her fully. I've been going through motions for 3 years, Rowan. Breathing, but not living. Working, but not building. Existing, but not hoping. You think that's peace? It's just slow death with better scenery. He picked up another stone. At least this way, if I die, it'll be for something that matters. Before Rowan could respond, Martha called out from the cabin. Riders approaching, multiple groups coming from all 3 directions. Elias grabbed his rifle and ran toward the cabin, Rowan close behind. From the porch, they could see what Martha had spotted. 3 separate groups of riders, maybe 5 men each, converging on the valley from different approaches. Garrett had learned from his previous failures. This time he wasn't probing or testing. This time he was coming with everything he had. Positions, Elias shouted. Thomas, East Ridge. James, Creekbed. Martha, Rowan, with me in the cabin. Remember, controlled fire, make every shot count. They scrambled into position as the riders closed in. Through the window, Rowan could see Garrett himself leading the southern group, his face twisted with rage even at this distance. The riders spread out as they approached, using cover, moving with the discipline of men who knew what they were doing. The first shots came from Thomas's position, 2 quick cracks that dropped a rider from the eastern group. Return fire peppered his location, forcing him to duck behind cover. Then James opened up from the creek bed and the western riders scattered. But the southern group kept coming, Garrett at their head, charging straight up the main trail toward the cabin. Elias sighted carefully and fired, his bullet taking down the rider next to Garrett. The rancher didn't even flinch, just spurred his horse harder, his face a mask of fury. He's lost his mind, Martha muttered, firing and working her lever. He's going to get himself killed just to get at her. That's the plan, Elias said grimly. If Garrett goes down, his men lose their reason to fight. They're hired guns, not crusaders. Take out the man paying them, and this ends. Rowan sighted on Garrett, her finger on the trigger, and for a moment she had him. One squeeze, one bullet, and the man who'd tormented her would be dead. But her hand trembled, her training from Martha warring with something deeper, the knowledge that killing Garrett wouldn't just end this fight, it would change her forever. The hesitation cost her. Garrett reached the tree line and vanished into cover, still alive, still dangerous. Rowan cursed and shifted her aim to another rider, firing and missing as her shot went wide. Focus! Martha snapped. Don't think, just shoot! But thinking was all Rowan could do, because somewhere in the chaos of gunfire and screaming horses, a terrible realization had crystallized in her mind. Garrett would never stop. Even if they survived tonight, even if they killed half his men and drove him off, he would come back, again and again, with more men, more money, more legal maneuvering, until he either had her or she was dead. The only way this ended was if Garrett was destroyed completely, not just defeated, but ruined, and she was the only one who could do it. I need to tell you something, she shouted over the gunfire, about Garrett, about what he's really been doing. Elias fired, ejected a spent cartridge, chambered another round. Now's not the time. It's exactly the time. Because if we survive this, we need leverage. We need something that'll break him completely. She ducked as a bullet shattered the window frame above her head. Garrett's not just a rancher. He's been running guns to the reservation tribes, selling them to both sides of the conflicts, playing them against each other. I found his ledgers when I was working at the ranch, saw the numbers, the names, the bribes to federal agents. That's why he really wanted me silenced, not because I rejected him, but because I knew too much. Martha's eyes went wide. Gun running? Sweet mercy, child, that's a federal offense. That's hanging offense. I know, and I can prove it. I made copies of his ledgers before he caught me. Hid them with my sister. Rowan fired again, this time hitting her target. Clara has them. That's why Garrett moved her into his house. He's been searching for those documents. He knows they exist, knows they could destroy him. Elias's mind raced even as he continued firing. Gun running was serious enough to bring federal marshals. Real ones, not the ones in Garrett's pocket. If they could get those documents, if they could expose what Garrett had been doing, they wouldn't just survive this. They'd win, completely and permanently. Where exactly are they hidden? He asked. In Clara's music box. The one our mother gave her before she died. It has a false bottom. Only Clara and I know about it. Then we need to get to Clara, tonight, during this chaos, while Garrett's men are focused here. Elias looked at Martha. Can you and your boys hold this position without me? Martha didn't hesitate. We'll hold. You get that girl and those documents. But Elias, Garrett's ranch is 10 miles from here. You'll never make it there and back before dawn. I don't need to make it back. I just need to get Clara out and get those ledgers somewhere safe. He turned to Rowan. You know the ranch layout. Where does he keep her? Second floor, east wing. There's a guard posted outside her door at night, sometimes two. Rowan's heart was hammering. But Elias, if you're caught, I won't be. He grabbed his coat and his knife, leaving the rifle. I'll need speed and stealth, not firepower. If I'm not back by dawn, assume I failed and get out of here. Take Martha and her boys and run as far as you can. I'm coming with you. Rowan grabbed her own coat, her voice brooking no argument. Clara won't trust a stranger, and I know every inch of that ranch. You need me. You're the one Garrett wants most, which is exactly why I'm the perfect distraction if things go wrong. She met his eyes steadily. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. That's my sister, Elias, my family. You think I'm going to sit here while you risk your life for her? For a moment, Elias looked like he might argue. Then he nodded sharply. Fine. But you follow my lead? You do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. Martha grabbed them both. You're both insane. You know that, right? Probably, Elias agreed, but it's our best shot. Maybe our only shot. Then take this. Martha pressed a small derringer into Rowan's hand. 2 shots. Make them count if you need them. She turned to Elias. And you, bring those children home safe, all 3 of you. They slipped out the back of the cabin as gunfire continued to rage at the front. The night had fully fallen now, providing cover as they made their way to where Elias kept his horses. He saddled 2 quickly, working by feel in the darkness while Rowan kept watch. Mount up, he whispered. We'll circle wide. Stay off the main trails. With luck, Garrett's men are so focused on the siege they won't notice us slipping away. They rode out quietly, 2 shadows moving through the forest, while behind them the cabin blazed with muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of rifles echoed off the mountain walls. Rowan felt a twist of guilt leaving Martha and her sons to face the assault, but she forced it down. This was bigger than one fight. This was about ending Garrett's power forever. The ride to the ranch took 2 hours of hard pushing through rough country. They approached from the north, across open rangeland that left them exposed but allowed them to see any patrols. The ranch house rose before them, a sprawling structure that spoke of wealth built on the backs of workers and the blood of anyone who'd stood in Garrett's way. Lights burned in several windows despite the late hour. Elias studied the layout carefully, noting guard positions and sight lines. 4 men visible, 2 by the main entrance, 1 patrolling the perimeter, 1 on the east wing balcony, probably more inside. The east balcony leads to Clara's room, Rowan whispered. If we can get up there. 2 exposed. We'll go in through the kitchen, service entrance on the west side, usually unlocked for early morning staff. Elias dismounted and helped Rowan down. Stay close, stay quiet, and if shooting starts, you grab Clara and get out. Don't wait for me. They crept toward the house, using the darkness and the scattered outbuildings for cover. The service entrance was exactly where Rowan had said, and as Elias had hoped, it was unlocked. They slipped inside into a large kitchen that still smelled of the evening meal. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, men talking, laughing, drinking. Garrett's remaining guards, unaware that their boss was currently besieging a mountain cabin miles away. Elias and Rowan moved through the kitchen into a service corridor, their boots silent on the worn runner carpet. A staircase rose at the end of the hall, servant stairs that led to the second floor. They climbed quickly, every creak of wood making Rowan's heart jump. At the top, they emerged into a hallway lined with doors. Rowan pointed to the third door on the right, where lamplight showed beneath the gap. They approached carefully, and Rowan's heart sank when she saw the guard. A big man slouched in a chair outside Clara's door, a rifle across his lap. He appeared to be dozing, his chin on his chest, but appearances could be deceiving. Elias put his lips to Rowan's ear. "I'll handle him. You get Clara ready to move." Before she could respond, he moved. Fast and silent as a hunting cat, Elias crossed the distance and drove his fist into the guard's throat. The man's eyes flew open, his mouth working for air that wouldn't come. Elias caught him as he toppled, lowering him silently to the floor and dragging him into a nearby linen closet. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. Rowan tried the door handle, locked. She knocked softly, 3 quick raps, then 2. Their childhood signal. "Clara? It's me. It's Rowan." Silence. Then the sound of a lock turning, and the door opened a crack. A girl's face appeared, young and frightened, with the same mismatched eyes as her sister. When she saw Rowan, her face crumpled. "Rowan?" she whispered. "Oh God, Rowan, I thought... They said you were..." "Shh, I'm here now. We're getting you out." Rowan pushed into the room, Elias right behind her. "The music box, Clara. The one Mama gave you. Where is it?" Clara pointed to the dresser with trembling hands. "There." "But, Rowan, Garrett's men have been searching everywhere, tearing apart my things." "Did they find it?" Elias asked urgently. "No, I hid it inside the mattress, sewed it in. They never thought to look there." Smart girl. Rowan grabbed a knife from Elias and slit the mattress open, reaching inside until her fingers found the familiar wooden box. She pulled it out, her hands shaking, and opened the lid. Music tinkled out, a lullaby their mother used to sing. Rowan pressed the hidden catch, and the false bottom popped open. Inside lay a sheaf of papers covered in neat columns of numbers and names, ledgers, records, proof of everything Garrett had done. "Got them," she breathed. "Elias, we've got them." "Then let's move. Clara, can you ride?" The girl nodded, already grabbing a coat. "I can ride. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe, somewhere Garrett can't reach." Elias moved to the door, checked the hallway. "Stay close, and stay quiet. If I say run, you..." Footsteps on the stairs cut him off. Heavy boots, multiple men, coming up fast. Elias swore under his breath and pulled back into the room, easing the door almost closed. Through the gap, they watched as 3 guards reached the top of the stairs. "Check on the girl," one of them said. "Garrett sent word to double the watch. Said there might be trouble tonight." They were coming straight toward Clara's room, toward the unconscious guard Elias had stashed in the linen closet. In seconds, they'd discover him, raise the alarm, and the whole house would be locked down. Elias made a decision. He stepped out into the hallway, his hands visible and empty. "Evening, gentlemen. I'm looking for Garrett Thornton. Official business." The guards froze, hands moving toward their guns. "Who the hell are you?" "Federal Marshal Crow, out of Denver. I have questions regarding illegal weapons sales to hostile tribes." Elias's voice was calm, authoritative, every inch the lawman he'd briefly been years ago. "If you could direct me to Mr. Thornton's office..." "Marshal?" The lead guard's eyes narrowed. "Garrett didn't say nothing about no marshal coming." "It's a surprise investigation. Now, if you'll..." The guard's eyes flicked to Clara's door, saw it slightly ajar, and his suspicion crystallized into certainty. His hand went for his gun. "That's not..." Elias moved. His knife flashed in the lamplight, burying itself in the guard's shoulder. The man screamed and fell back, and chaos erupted. The other 2 guards drew their weapons, and Elias dove for cover as bullets tore through the air. "Run!" he shouted to Rowan and Clara. "Get out now!" Rowan grabbed her sister's hand and bolted for the servant stairs, the ledgers clutched against her chest. Behind them, gunfire thundered and men shouted. They hit the stairs at a run, taking them 2 at a time, Clara sobbing with fear but keeping pace. They burst into the kitchen just as more guards came running from the main house. Rowan skidded to a stop, trapped between the men ahead and the gunfire behind. Her hand found the derringer Martha had given her, and she raised it with trembling hands. "Don't move," she commanded, though her voice shook. The guards laughed. "Put it down, sweetheart. You're not shooting anyone." They were right. She wasn't a killer, wasn't someone who could pull a trigger and end a life in cold blood. Her finger froze on the trigger even as the men advanced, even as she knew hesitation meant capture and death. Then Elias was there, appearing behind the guards like an avenging ghost. He'd taken a rifle from somewhere, and he swung it like a club, dropping the first guard before the others could react. Two more went down under his assault, moving with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd fought hand to hand and learned to win. "Move!" he roared, and Rowan moved. She and Clara ran for the service entrance, out into the night, toward where they'd left the horses. Behind them, the ranch house erupted with shouting men and lamplight as the alarm spread. They reached the horses, and Elias boosted Clara onto one, while Rowan mounted the other. "Ride hard for Timber Ridge," he said, swinging up behind Clara. "Don't stop, don't look back. We need to get those ledgers to the territorial governor before Garrett realizes what we've taken." They rode out at a gallop, gunshots cracking behind them but falling short in the darkness. Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs, the ledgers pressed tight against her chest, her sister's sobs of relief and terror mixing with the thunder of hooves. They'd done it. Against all odds, against armed guards in Garrett's fortress, they'd rescued Clara and stolen the evidence that would destroy him. But as the ranch house fell away behind them and the dark wilderness opened up ahead, Rowan knew this was far from over. Garrett would come for them with everything he had. He'd hunt them across the territory, use every resource at his disposal, call in every favor, and bought lawmen. The real war was just beginning, and this time there would be no mercy on either side. They rode through the night like souls fleeing damnation, the horses straining beneath them as trees blurred past in the moonlight. Clara clung to Elias, her face buried against his back, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and fear. Rowan kept pace alongside them, the leather satchel containing Garrett's ledgers strapped tight across her chest, every instinct screaming that pursuit was coming. It came sooner than expected. The crack of a distant rifle split the night, and bark exploded from a pine tree 20 feet to their left. Elias yanked his horse hard right, plunging them off the trail and into dense forest. "They're on us! Split up at the creek. Meet at the old mill in Timber Ridge." "I don't know where that is," Rowan shouted back. "North edge of town. You can't miss it. Go!" Another shot rang out, closer this time. Rowan caught a glimpse of riders behind them, 4, maybe 5, closing the distance with frightening speed. Garrett must have had men stationed at the ranch, men who'd mounted up the moment the alarm sounded. And now they were hunting. The forest opened onto a shallow creek, water glinting silver in the moonlight. Elias veered left along the bank while Rowan drove her horse straight across, hooves throwing up spray. Behind her, she heard the pursuers reach the creek, heard them shouting to each other as they tried to decide which target to follow. Most chose her. Rowan leaned low over her horse's neck, urging every ounce of speed from the exhausted animal. The ledgers bounced against her chest, a constant reminder of what she carried, what Garrett would kill to keep hidden. Tree branches whipped at her face and arms as she crashed through underbrush, following what might have been a game trail or might have been nothing at all. The riders behind her were gaining. She could hear their horses breathing, could hear one man shouting, "Don't shoot! Garrett wants her alive, the documents too!" Alive. That single word sent ice through her veins. Garrett didn't want her dead anymore. He wanted her captured, wanted to make an example of her, wanted to take back what she'd stolen and punish her in ways that would make Branding seem merciful. She'd die before she let that happen. The forest suddenly opened onto a steep hillside, and Rowan's horse balked, nearly throwing her. She fought for control, saw the drop-off ahead, maybe 30 feet down to a rocky slope. Behind her, the riders were seconds away. She had no choice. "Forgive me," she whispered to the horse, then drove her heels hard into its flanks. The animal leaped forward and over, and for a terrifying moment they were airborne, falling, the ground rushing up to meet them. They hit hard, the horse's legs buckling, and Rowan was thrown clear. She hit the slope and rolled, rocks tearing at her clothes and skin, the world spinning in a chaos of pain and momentum. She came to rest at the bottom, gasping for breath, her body screaming. Above her, the riders had pulled up at the edge, silhouetted against the sky. One raised his rifle, and Rowan scrambled behind a boulder just as the shot sparked off stone inches from her head. "Get down there!" someone shouted. "She can't have gone far!" Rowan forced herself to move, every muscle protesting. Her horse was gone, either run off or injured too badly to continue. She was on foot now, in unfamiliar country, with armed men hunting her. The ledgers were still secure in the satchel, miraculously intact, but they were useless if she didn't survive to deliver them. She ran, stumbling through the darkness, following the slope downward. Behind her, she heard the men descending, crashing through brush with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey was wounded. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her sides screaming with what might have been broken ribs. The slope leveled out into a narrow ravine, steep walls rising on either side. Rowan followed it, praying it led somewhere useful and not to a dead end. The ravine twisted and turned, and she lost sight of her pursuers, lost the sound of them. For a moment, she dared to hope she'd escaped. Then she rounded a bend and stopped dead. The ravine ended in a sheer rock wall, maybe 40 feet high. No way up, no way around. A dead end after all. Rowan spun, searching desperately for another route, but there was nothing, just smooth stone walls and the single path she'd come down. Trap. She'd run straight into a trap. Footsteps echoed off the rock walls. The hunters had found her trail. They were coming, and there was nowhere left to run. She pressed her back against the stone, drew Martha's derringer with shaking hands, and waited. 2 shots. 2 bullets against 4 armed men. The mathematics were brutal and simple. She might take 2 of them with her if she was lucky and her aim was true. But the other 2 would get her, would take the ledgers, would drag her back to Garrett, unless she destroyed the ledgers first. The thought came suddenly, desperately. She could burn them, could strike a match and turn Garrett's secrets to ash before they captured her. It would mean sacrificing the evidence, sacrificing their one chance to destroy him legally, but at least he wouldn't get them back. At least her death would mean something. Rowan fumbled for the matches she kept in her coat pocket, her hands clumsy with cold and fear. The footsteps were getting closer. Voices echoed down the ravine, confident and cruel. "End of the line, sweetheart. Come on out and this goes easy for you." She struck a match. It flared bright in the darkness, and she held it to the corner of the first ledger page. The paper caught, flame spreading across decades of careful record-keeping, of names and dates and numbers that proved Garrett's crimes. "No!" A man burst around the corner, saw what she was doing, and lunged forward. Rowan pulled the trigger. The derringer's bark was sharp and loud in the confined space. The man went down, clutching his leg, screaming. The other 3 rushed forward, and Rowan fired her second shot. It went wide, sparking off stone, and then they were on her. Rough hands grabbed her, yanking the burning papers away and stomping out the flames. Someone twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to her knees. The satchel was ripped from her shoulder, and she watched helplessly as one of the men examined the ledgers, checking the damage. "Most of it's intact," he said, relief evident in his voice. "She only got the first few pages." "Garrett's going to skin her alive for even trying." The man holding her twisted her arm harder, making her cry out, "Stupid girl. You really thought you could beat him? Thought you could steal from Garrett Thornton and get away with it?" "I already did," Rowan gasped out. "Those ledgers prove everything, every illegal gun sale, every bribe, every murder, and now you're witnesses to kidnapping a married woman. How much is Garrett paying you? Enough to hang for him?" The men exchanged glances, and Rowan saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. Good. Plant the seed, make them question their loyalty. If she was going to die, she'd at least make Garrett's victory as hollow as possible. "Shut up." The one holding her yanked her to her feet. "We're taking you back. What Garrett does with you after that ain't our concern." They started dragging her back up the ravine, 2 men supporting their wounded companion, the other clutching the satchel of ledgers. Rowan struggled, but exhaustion and injury had stolen her strength. This was it. This was how it ended, captured, beaten, about to be delivered back into Garrett's hands. Then gunfire erupted from the ravine walls above. The man holding Rowan jerked and fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The others scattered, seeking cover, returning fire at an unseen enemy. Rowan dropped to the ground, making herself small as bullets ricocheted off stone and men shouted in confusion and fear. A figure descended from the shadows, Elias, moving with lethal precision, his rifle speaking again and again. Another of Garrett's men went down, then another. The last one raised his hands in surrender, the satchel of ledgers clutched against his chest. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I'm done!" Elias dropped to the ravine floor, his rifle trained on the surviving man. "Ledgers, now, slow." The man set the satchel down carefully and backed away, hands still raised. Elias grabbed it without taking his eyes off the survivor. "Get out of here. Tell Garrett exactly what happened. Tell him Rowan Crow is under my protection, and anyone who comes for her dies. You understand?" The man nodded frantically and ran, leaving his dead companions behind. Elias turned to Rowan, and his expression softened with relief and anger in equal measure. "Are you hurt?" "Ribs, maybe. Some cuts and bruises." She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Elias caught her, supporting her weight. "How did you find me?" "Followed the gunshots, then followed the screaming when you lit those papers on fire. That was either brilliant or insane." "Both." She laughed weakly, then winced at the pain it caused. "Where's Clara?" "Safe. I left her with a family in Timber Ridge. Good people. They'll protect her until we get there." He checked her over with gentle efficiency, probing for serious injuries. "You're lucky nothing's broken. Can you ride if I support you?" "I can do whatever I need to do." She met his eyes. "We have the ledgers, Elias. We actually have them. This ends Garrett." "Not yet, it doesn't. First, we have to get them to someone who can act on them. Someone beyond Garrett's reach and beyond his money." Elias helped her toward where he'd hidden his horse. "I'm thinking the territorial governor in Denver. He's supposed to be honest, or at least more honest than anyone else in this territory. Denver's 3 days' ride." "I know, and Garrett will be hunting us every mile of the way." He lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. "But we've come this far. Might as well finish it." They rode through what remained of the night, Elias keeping to back trails and hidden paths that spoke of years learning this country. Rowan drifted in and out of consciousness, held secure by his arms, trusting him to keep them safe while her battered body tried to heal. Dawn found them at the outskirts of Timber Ridge, a mining town built in the shadow of the mountains, rough and ready and big enough to get lost in. Elias took them to a small house on the north edge, where smoke rose from the chimney despite the early hour. A woman answered his knock, middle-aged, kind-faced, with worry in her eyes that eased when she saw them. "Thank the heavens. I was starting to think something had gone wrong." "Nothing we couldn't handle, Mrs. Patterson. How's the girl?" "Sleeping, finally. Poor thing cried herself exhausted, asking for her sister." Mrs. Patterson's eyes found Rowan. "You must be Rowan. She looks just like you, same unusual eyes." Rowan slid from the horse, her body protesting every movement. "I need to see her." "Of course, but first let's get you cleaned up and those wounds tended." Mrs. Patterson ushered them inside, where warmth and the smell of coffee wrapped around Rowan like a blanket. In a small bedroom off the kitchen, Clara lay sleeping, her face peaceful for the first time in months. Rowan sank into the chair beside the bed and took her sister's hand. Clara stirred, her eyes opening, and when she saw Rowan, tears spilled down her cheeks. "You came back," Clara whispered. "You actually came back." "Always." Rowan brushed hair from her sister's face. "I'll always come back for you." Mrs. Patterson gave them privacy, pulling Elias into the kitchen where she pressed coffee and bread on him. Through the doorway, he could see the sisters holding each other, crying and talking in low voices, making up for months of separation and fear. "Those men at the ranch," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, "they'll come looking here eventually." "I know. That's why we can't stay." Elias accepted the coffee gratefully. "We need to get to Denver, get these ledgers to the governor. Once Garrett's arrested, the girls will be safe." "And what about Martha and her boys? You left them defending your cabin against Garrett's siege." Guilt twisted in Elias's gut. He'd almost forgotten in the chaos of the rescue and pursuit. Martha and her sons were still up there, still holding the line against Garrett's men. Or they were dead, overrun, when the odds became too much. "I have to trust they held," he said, though the words felt hollow. "They're tough, experienced. They know when to fight and when to fade into the mountains. And if they didn't hold, if Garrett took your cabin, then he'll find it empty, and we'll still have what matters, the girls and the evidence." But saying it didn't make the guilt easier to bear. Martha had stood with him, had risked her life and her son's lives for people who were essentially strangers, and he'd left them to face the consequences alone. The morning passed in tense waiting. Mrs. Patterson's husband, a retired lawman who'd moved to Timber Ridge for his health, examined Garrett's ledgers with growing astonishment. This is extraordinary. The detail, the records. If even half of this is accurate, Garrett's not just facing prison. He's facing a noose. It's all accurate, Rowan said, emerging from the bedroom with Clara at her side. Her sister looked fragile but determined, her arm linked with Rowan's. I compiled most of it myself when I was working as his bookkeeper. He thought I was too naive to understand what I was seeing. He was wrong. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. The governor will need to see this personally. Can't trust it to telegraph or post. Too easy for Garrett to intercept. Someone needs to ride to Denver and deliver it directly. I'll go, Elias said immediately. Not alone you won't. Rowan straightened despite her injuries. Those are my documents. My work. I'm seeing this through. You're in no condition. I'm in exactly the condition I need to be. Stop trying to protect me, Elias. I'm not fragile, and I'm not backing down now. She turned to Clara. You'll stay here with the Pattersons. You'll be safe. Clara shook her head stubbornly. No. If you're going, I'm going. I won't be separated from you again. I can't. Clara, no, Rowan, not this time. The girl's voice was firm despite her youth. We're family. We stay together. That's what Mama would say. Rowan looked to Elias, who shrugged helplessly. She's right. Splitting up just gives Garrett more targets. Better we stick together, watch each other's backs. Then we all go. Mrs. Patterson stood, brushing flour from her apron. Bill and I know the route to Denver better than anyone. We'll guide you, help you avoid Garrett's men. It'll be safer with 5 than 3. Her husband started to protest, then saw the set of his wife's jaw and wisely reconsidered. Fine, but we leave within the hour. Every minute we wait is another minute for Garrett to organize pursuit. They prepared quickly, gathering supplies and fresh horses. The Pattersons had contacts throughout the mining camps and trading posts between Timber Ridge and Denver, people who owed them favors, people who could provide shelter and fresh mounts. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. As they loaded their saddlebags, a rider came galloping into town from the north, his horse lathered and exhausted. He pulled up in front of the general store, shouting for anyone who'd listen. Garrett Thornton's dead. The whole territory's talking about it. Someone killed him last night up at the Crow Cabin. Rowan and Elias exchanged shocked glances. Dead? Garrett was dead? They hurried to where a crowd was gathering around the messenger. What happened? Elias demanded. Tell us everything. The messenger, a young man who worked for the telegraph office, was breathless with excitement and the importance of his news. Story goes that Garrett was besieging this cabin up in the high country, trying to get at some woman he claimed belonged to him. But the defenders held him off all night, and when he tried a final assault at dawn, someone got a lucky shot, caught him right in the chest. He died before his men could get him down the mountain. Who? Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. Who killed him? Don't know for sure. Some say it was the mountainman who owned the cabin. Others say it was a woman, one of the defenders. Either way, Garrett's dead, and his men scattered soon as he fell. Whole operation fell apart without him leading it. The messenger rode on to spread his news, leaving Rowan standing in the street, trying to process what she'd heard. Garrett was dead. The man who'd tormented her, branded her, tried to own her, he was gone. Just like that, a bullet had ended what had seemed like an endless nightmare. She should have felt relief, joy, liberation. Instead, she felt hollow, empty, like someone had pulled a supporting beam from her life, and now she didn't know how to stand without the weight of hating him to hold her up. Rowan? Clara touched her arm gently. Are you all right? I don't know. She looked at her sister, at Elias, at the Pattersons who'd offered help to strangers. I spent so long being afraid of him, fighting him, that I don't know who I am without that fight. Then we'll figure it out together. Elias's voice was steady, grounding. But first, we still need to deliver those ledgers. Garrett's dead, but his crimes need to be exposed. The people he hurt deserve justice, and the system that let him operate needs to be torn down. He was right. This wasn't over just because Garrett had fallen. His legacy remained: the corrupt judges, the bought lawmen, the structures of power that had allowed him to terrorize an entire territory. Destroying that was bigger than one man's death. "Then we ride to Denver," Rowan said, straightening her shoulders. "We finish what we started." They mounted up as noon approached, 5 riders heading east toward the capital with evidence that would shake the territory's government to its foundations. Behind them, Timber Ridge buzzed with news of Garrett's death, speculation and rumor spreading like wildfire. The journey to Denver took 4 hard days of riding, dodging patrols and staying ahead of Garrett's remaining men, who were still loyal enough, or scared enough of their own involvement, to try intercepting them. But the Pattersons knew every back trail and hidden canyon, and Elias's military training kept them moving like a tactical unit, rather than panicked fugitives. On the 3rd night, camped in a shallow cave while rain pounded the landscape, Martha and her sons found them. They rode in wet and exhausted but alive, and the relief Elias felt nearly buckled his knees. "I thought, when I heard about the assault, that we died holding your cabin?" Martha laughed, harsh but genuine. "Not quite. We gave them hell until Garrett went down. Then we melted into the mountains like smoke, tracked you here through contacts and educated guessing." She dismounted and pulled Elias into a brief, fierce hug. "Good to see you made it, boy. And you got the girl out, too." Clara waved shyly from where she sat by the fire, and Martha's expression softened. "Well now, must be Clara. You've got your sister's courage in those eyes." "Thank you for helping her," Clara said quietly. "Rowan told me what you did, how you stood with her when no one else would. Your mother was my friend. This is what friends do." Martha turned to Rowan, studying the brand on her face in the firelight. "How are you holding up, child?" "Better than I was. Worse than I want to be." Rowan touched the mark unconsciously. "But we're almost there. Denver's less than a day's ride." "Then let's make sure you get there." Martha's sons began checking weapons and organizing watches. "We didn't come all this way to lose you in the final stretch." The next morning dawned clear and cold, and they rode into Denver as the sun climbed toward noon. The territorial capital sprawled before them, bigger and more civilized than anything Clara had ever seen. Her eyes went wide at the brick buildings and paved streets, the crowds of people moving with purpose and prosperity. The governor's mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city, imposing and official. They tied their horses outside and approached the front entrance, a motley crew of trail-worn travelers carrying the fate of a corrupt empire in a leather satchel. A secretary tried to turn them away at the door, but Mr. Patterson's former credentials as a lawman and Martha's forceful personality got them past the initial barriers. Within an hour, they were sitting in the governor's private office, the ledgers spread across his desk, while he read with increasingly horrified fascination. Governor William Harmon was a slight man with steel-gray hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything, but the ledgers surprised him. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, looking up at Rowan. "You compiled all of this while working for Garrett Thornton?" "Most of it, sir. The rest came from documents I found while searching for evidence." She sat straight despite her exhaustion, Clara beside her providing silent support. "It's all accurate. Every name, every transaction, every bribe. Including bribes to federal judges and territorial marshals." Harmon's expression was grim. "If this is legitimate, and I have no reason to doubt you, it implicates dozens of officials at every level of government. This isn't just about Garrett Thornton. This is about systemic corruption that's been rotting this territory for years. Which is exactly why it needs to be exposed," Elias said. "Garrett's dead, but his network remains. If you don't act on this, someone else will just step into his place and continue the same operations." Harmon nodded slowly, his fingers drumming on the ledgers. "I'll need time to verify these claims, to build cases against everyone involved. But I give you my word, justice will be served. The people Garrett hurt will see their abuser's empire dismantled completely." "And the women?" Rowan leaned forward. "The ones he branded? The ones he sold at auction? The ones still trapped in situations like I was? What happens to them?" "The auction laws will be reviewed and likely repealed. Any woman married under duress or sold against her will can petition for annulment or divorce. We'll provide protection and assistance where needed." Harmon's gaze moved to the brand on Rowan's face. What he did to you was barbaric. I'm sorry the system failed you so completely. Just make sure it doesn't fail the next woman." Rowan stood, swaying slightly. Clara caught her arm, steadying her. "That's all I ask. Make it mean something." "I will. You have my word as governor and as a man who believes in actual justice." Harmon stood as well, extending his hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Crow. You've done this territory a tremendous service." Rowan shook his hand, too tired to correct the assumption about her marriage to Elias. Let them believe what they wanted. The paperwork Martha had filed made it legal enough for government purposes, even if it had been born of necessity rather than love. They left the governor's office as the sun was setting, painting Denver in shades of gold and amber. The ledgers remained behind, evidence now in official hands, the proof of Garrett's crimes becoming the foundation for prosecutions that would reshape the territory. "What now?" Clara asked as they stood on the steps of the mansion, looking out over the city. "Now?" Rowan felt the weight of months, maybe years, of fear and fighting finally lifting from her shoulders. "Now we rest, and then we figure out what comes next." Elias stood beside her, close but not touching, his presence steady and grounding. "There's a decent hotel 2 streets over. We can get rooms, real beds, hot baths, take a few days to recover before we decide anything. And then? Then you're free, Rowan. Really free. Free to go wherever you want, be whoever you want. No one owns you. No one controls you. The choice is entirely yours." She looked at him, this man who'd bought her freedom with his last dollar, who'd married her to protect her, who'd risked everything to help her save her sister and expose corruption. This man who kept offering her freedom instead of trying to keep her. "What if I choose to stay?" The words came out before she could stop them. "What if I choose you?" Elias went very still. "Rowan, I know it started as a legal fiction. I know you don't owe me anything, that you were just trying to do the right thing. But somewhere in all of this, the fighting and the running and the desperate scrambling to survive, I started to care about you more than care. And I need to know if there's any chance you feel the same, or if I should start figuring out how to build a life that doesn't include you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Clara stepped away tactfully, giving them space, and Martha herded her sons and the Pattersons toward the hotel with knowing looks. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd buried my heart with her, thought I'd never feel anything again except grief and emptiness. Then you came along, fierce and stubborn and absolutely refusing to be broken, and you made me remember what it felt like to hope. To want something more than just getting through another day. Is that a yes?" He smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "It's a yes. If you'll have me, a broken-down mountain man with more scars than prospects, then yes. I want you to stay. I want us to figure out what comes next together." Rowan kissed him then, standing on the steps of the governor's mansion as sunset painted the sky and a new chapter of their lives began. It wasn't the kiss of a romance novel. It was tentative and uncertain, flavored with exhaustion and pain and the knowledge that healing would take time. But it was real, and it was theirs. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was crying happy tears, and Martha was grinning like she'd known this was coming all along. "Well," Martha said, "I suppose this means the marriage won't need annulling after all." "I suppose not," Rowan agreed, lacing her fingers through Elias's. "I suppose it doesn't." They walked toward the hotel together, a family forged in fire and desperation, but choosing to become something more. Behind them, the governor's mansion held the evidence that would bring down an empire of corruption. Ahead of them lay uncertainty and possibility in equal measure. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rowan wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. The hotel room was modest but clean, with 2 beds covered in quilts that actually smelled of lavender instead of mildew and fear. Clara claimed one immediately, collapsing onto it with a sigh that seemed to release months of tension. Rowan stood by the window, watching the streets of Denver come alive with evening lamplight, still struggling to believe they'd actually made it. "You should rest," Elias said from the doorway, his coat draped over one arm. "I'll be in the room next door if you need anything." Stay. Rowan turned from the window. Just for a while. I'm not ready to be alone yet. He nodded and settled into the chair by the door, his rifle propped within easy reach out of habit. Some instincts died hard. Clara was already asleep, exhaustion claiming her the moment her head hit the pillow, soft snores filling the quiet room. It doesn't feel real, Rowan said softly. Being safe, being free, having Clara back. All of it feels like something that could vanish the moment I stop watching. It won't vanish. This is real, Rowan. We made it real. Elias watched her in the lamplight, taking in the way she held herself, still guarded, still ready to fight or flee, unable to simply exist without threat hanging over her. But it's going to take time. Time to believe it, time to heal. You can't rush that. How long did it take you? After Sarah? He was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I ever really healed. I just learned to function around the wound, built my life in a shape that didn't require the parts of me that died with her. He met her eyes. But maybe that's about to change. Rowan crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed nearest his chair. Tell me about her. About Sarah. Not just how she died, but who she was. So he did. In the dim lamplight, with Clara's gentle breathing as background, Elias told stories about the woman he'd loved. How she'd insisted on learning to shoot despite hating guns, because she refused to be helpless. How she'd sung off-key while cooking and never cared who heard. How she'd wanted children, but the mountain winters had been hard and her body had been fragile, and they'd decided to wait for better circumstances that never came. She would have liked you, he said finally. Would have admired your strength, your refusal to break. I did break, Rowan whispered. So many times. I just kept putting myself back together because the alternative was letting Garrett win. That's not breaking. That's bending. There's a difference. Elias leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Breaking is when you don't get back up. You always got back up. Because I had to. Because Clara needed me. And now? What do you need? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. What did she need? Safety, obviously. Peace. Time to heal. But beyond that, the future stretched ahead of her like unmarked territory, and for the first time in her life, she could choose her own path through it. I need to see this through, she said finally. Need to make sure the governor actually follows through, that the trials happen, that the system changes. And then, she touched the brand on her face unconsciously. Then I need to figure out who Rowan Crow is when she's not just surviving. We'll figure it out together, if that's what you want. It is. She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I want that very much. They sat like that until Rowan's eyes began to droop, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Elias helped her to the second bed, pulled the quilt over her, and moved toward the door. Elias? Yeah? Thank you. For all of it. For seeing me when I was invisible. For fighting when it would have been easier to walk away. You were never invisible, Rowan. Not to me. He paused in the doorway. Sleep well. Tomorrow we start building something new. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of testimony and recovery. Governor Harmon moved quickly, assembling a team of prosecutors and investigators who weren't connected to Garrett's network. Rowan spent hours walking them through the ledgers, explaining the codes and abbreviations, providing context that turned numbers into narrative. Clara testified too, describing her captivity and the things she'd overheard while Garrett thought she was just a frightened girl he could ignore. Her youth and obvious sincerity made her a powerful witness, and the prosecutors built their cases around the sisters' accounts. Martha and her sons stayed in Denver through it all, providing protection and support. The Pattersons returned to Timber Ridge but sent regular letters updating them on the territory's reaction to the unfolding scandal. Newspaper editors who'd been too afraid to challenge Garrett while he lived now printed explosive exposés about his crimes. Public sentiment shifted rapidly from shock to rage to demands for justice. The trials began in late autumn as the first snow dusted the peaks visible from Denver. Rowan attended every session, sitting in the gallery with Elias beside her and Clara on her other side. She watched as judge after judge, marshal after marshal, businessman after businessman was brought before the court and forced to answer for their complicity in Garrett's empire. Some fled the territory before they could be arrested. Others fought the charges with expensive lawyers and elaborate lies. But the evidence was overwhelming, the ledgers precise and damning. One by one, they fell. The trial that mattered most to Rowan was the case against Judge Morrison, the man who'd ruled her unfit for society, who'd authorized her auction and branding. He sat in the defendant's chair looking older and smaller than she remembered, his judicial robes replaced with a plain suit, his power stripped away. When called to testify against him, Rowan walked to the witness stand with her head high, the brand on her face visible to everyone in the courtroom. She told her story clearly and without embellishment: the assault, the rejection, the systematic destruction of her reputation, the mockery of justice that had ended with her standing hooded on an auction block. Morrison's lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she'd been a willing participant in the auction, that the marriage to Elias proved she'd been seeking a husband all along. But the prosecutor presented Garrett's own letters to Morrison, correspondence found in the ranch house after his death, that made the conspiracy explicit. "You branded her like cattle on Garrett Thornton's orders," the prosecutor said, holding up the brand itself as evidence. "You authorized this medieval punishment because Garrett Thornton paid you. How much, Judge Morrison? How much was Rowan Hale's dignity worth to you?" Morrison had no answer that wouldn't damn him further. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding him guilty on multiple counts of corruption, abuse of office, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, his career and reputation destroyed. Rowan felt nothing when the sentence was read. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that justice, however late, had finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, a woman approached her, middle-aged, well-dressed, with nervous hands that twisted a handkerchief into knots. "Mrs. Crow? I'm Rebecca Winters. I was at your auction. I watched them sell you, and I did nothing. I've been sick with shame ever since." Rowan studied her, seeing genuine remorse in the woman's eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that not everyone agreed with what was done to you. Some of us were just too cowardly to speak up, too afraid of Garrett's power. But we're trying to make it right now." She handed Rowan a folded paper. "That's a petition. 200 women from Ashford's Crossing and the surrounding towns demanding the territorial legislature abolish the auction laws and establish protections for women. We're using your case to force change, if you'll allow it." Rowan unfolded the paper and read through the names: merchants' wives, farmers' daughters, widows and mothers, all demanding reform. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "In support of Rowan Hale Crow and all women who have suffered under unjust law." "You can use my name," Rowan said, her voice thick. "Use my story. If it helps even one woman avoid what I went through, use whatever you need." Rebecca Winters squeezed her hand. "Thank you, and I'm sorry. For my silence, for my cowardice. I'm sorry." "Then make sure the next time you see injustice, you're not silent." Rowan folded the petition carefully. "That's how you make it right." As winter deepened and the trials continued, life began to take on a new rhythm. Elias and Rowan found a small house on the outskirts of Denver, close enough to the city for Clara's schooling, but far enough for the mountainman in Elias to breathe. It had a garden plot and a stable, a front porch that caught the afternoon sun, and enough rooms for a family that was still figuring out what shape it would take. Clara bloomed in school, her quick mind soaking up education like parched ground accepting rain. She made friends, joined a choir, started talking about becoming a teacher someday. The nightmares that had plagued her first weeks of freedom gradually faded, replaced by the normal concerns of a teenage girl discovering herself. Martha visited often, bringing news from the mountains and supplies from her own homestead. She'd decided to stay in the territory, she said, to help with the rebuilding that was happening in Ashford's Crossing and other towns where Garrett's influence had been strongest. Her sons had found work as legitimate security for mining operations, and she'd started training other women in self-defense and shooting. "Someone's got to make sure the next Garrett doesn't get as far as this one did," she said one evening over dinner. "Might as well be me." "Teaching women to shoot isn't going to stop corruption," Clara observed, passing the potatoes. "No, but it'll make them harder to victimize. And hard to victimize women are women who can stand up and demand change." Martha winked at Rowan. "Your sister's living proof of that." As spring approached and the snow began to melt, Rowan found herself drawn to the garden. She'd never had the chance to grow things before. Her life had been too unstable, too controlled by others. But now, with Elias's patient instruction, she learned to prepare soil and plant seeds, to nurture fragile shoots into strong plants. There was something deeply satisfying about creating life instead of just fighting to preserve it, about building instead of defending, about choosing growth instead of just surviving. One afternoon, while they worked side by side in the garden, Elias asked the question she'd been waiting for. What do you want to do about the marriage? The legal one, I mean. We could make it official, have a real ceremony, or we could annul it now that the danger's passed. Your choice. Rowan sat back on her heels, dirt under her fingernails, and sun on her face. Do you want to annul it? No. But I want you to have the choice. Want you to choose me because you want to, not because circumstances forced us together. Then I choose you. She smiled, feeling the scar tissue pull on her cheek, but not caring. I choose this life we're building. I choose mornings in the garden and evenings on the porch. I choose figuring out how to be happy when I've spent so long just trying to survive. You're sure? I'm sure. She leaned over and kissed him, tasting dirt and spring and possibility. So let's make it official. Let's have that ceremony. Let's say those vows, meaning every word. Let's choose each other on purpose this time. They were married in late spring, in a small ceremony in the garden they'd planted together. Clara stood as witness, wearing a new dress and flowers in her hair. Martha officiated again, but this time there was no desperation, no legal maneuvering, just two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and decided to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The governor attended, as did several of the prosecutors who'd worked on the corruption cases. Rebecca Winters came with a delegation from Ashford's Crossing, bringing news that the territorial legislature had passed sweeping reforms to marriage and property laws. The auction system was abolished. Women gained new rights to own property, to testify in court, to seek divorce. It wasn't perfect, wasn't everything that needed changing, but it was progress. You did this, Rebecca told Rowan after the ceremony. Your courage, your refusal to be silenced, it changed everything. We all did this, Rowan corrected. Every woman who spoke up, who signed that petition, who demanded better. That's what changed things. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Elias found Rowan standing by Sarah's grave. He'd brought a handful of her ashes from the mountain cabin and buried them in the garden, a small stone marker bearing her name and dates. I thought you might be here, he said softly. I wanted to thank her. Rowan touched the marker gently. For loving you? For teaching you how to be the kind of man who'd risk everything for a stranger. I wouldn't have you if not for her. She'd be glad you're here. Glad I found my way back to living. Elias put his arm around Rowan's shoulders. She never wanted me to be alone forever. I wish I could have known her. You do, in a way. Everything good in me, she put there. Everything worth loving, she taught me. He pulled Rowan closer. But you taught me something, too. You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that you can honor the past while still building a future. They stood together in the garden as evening painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, two people who'd been broken finding wholeness in each other. The summer that followed was full of firsts for Rowan. First time sleeping through the night without nightmares. First time laughing until her sides hurt at something Clara said. First time looking in the mirror and seeing the brand on her face as just another scar instead of a mark of shame. She started volunteering with Rebecca's women's group, teaching other survivors how to read financial documents and keep records that couldn't be disputed. She gave testimony to the legislature about the need for continued reform. She became, almost without meaning to, a symbol of resilience and change in a territory struggling to shed its corrupt past. But her favorite moments were the quiet ones. Mornings with Elias, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the mountains. Afternoons helping Clara with her studies. Evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing while the world settled into peaceful dark. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching fireflies dance in the garden, Clara asked the question that had been hanging unspoken between them all. What happens when people ask about the brand? When they stare and whisper and want to know the story? Rowan was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the raised scar tissue on her cheek. She'd thought about this often, about how to carry this mark that she couldn't remove, this permanent reminder of the worst thing that had ever been done to her. "I tell them the truth," she said finally, "that a powerful man tried to own me, tried to mark me as his property, and that I survived him. That this scar represents everything he tried to take from me and failed." She looked at her sister. "Scars don't have to be sources of shame, Clara. They can be proof of survival, evidence that we endured and kept going." "It doesn't bother you that everyone can see it?" "It bothered me at first. Part of me still wishes I could hide it, could erase what Garrett did." Rowan smiled slightly. "But another part of me is glad it's visible. Glad I can't hide what was done to me. Because hiding it means protecting the people who enabled it, and I'm done protecting anyone but the people I love." Elias reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You know that? I'm just stubborn. Same thing, sometimes." As autumn arrived and Clara started her second year of school, news came that the last of Garrett's major co-conspirators had been convicted and sentenced. The corruption trials were finally complete, the old guard thoroughly rooted out. Governor Harmon announced his intention to run for re-election on a platform of continued reform, and polling suggested he'd win easily. The territory was changing, slowly but surely. Women were running for local office in towns that had never allowed them to vote. New laws were being proposed and passed. The stories of abuse and corruption that had been whispered in secret were now shouted from newspaper pages and courthouse steps. It wasn't perfect. There was still resistance, still men who clung to the old ways and resented the changes. But the momentum had shifted, and Rowan could feel it. The sense that the world she'd brought Clara into would be fundamentally different from the one that had tried to destroy them both. In October, Rowan received a letter from a women's college in the East, inviting her to speak about her experiences and the reform movement she'd helped spark. The letter sat on the kitchen table for days while she debated. "You should go," Elias said finally. "Your story matters. Other women need to hear it. But the garden needs harvesting, and We'll be fine. We'll all be fine." He smiled at her tendency to worry, to want to control everything. "You've spent your whole life being told where you can go and what you can do. Don't start limiting yourself now that you're finally free." So she went, traveling by train across the country to speak at halls filled with young women hungry for change. She told her story over and over, watching recognition and fury and determination bloom on the faces of her audiences. She talked about the importance of financial independence, of legal knowledge, of refusing to be silent in the face of injustice. And everywhere she went, women came up to her afterward with their own stories. Women who'd been hurt, dismissed, sold, controlled. Women who'd survived and were fighting for better. Women who saw in Rowan's scarred face and unbowed spirit proof that survival was possible. She returned to Denver in late November, exhausted but energized, her saddlebags full of letters from women across the country asking for advice, for support, for connection. The movement she'd accidentally sparked was growing beyond anything she'd imagined. "I think I need to do more," she told Elias that first night back, curled against him in their bed. "The speaking is good, but it's not enough. Women need resources, need education, need practical help escaping situations like mine. So we build that." He kissed her forehead. "Figure out what's needed and build it." Over the winter, Rowan and Rebecca and a growing network of reform-minded women created the Western Women's Aid Society. They rented a small office in Denver, hired a lawyer to provide free legal advice, and established a fund to help women escape abusive situations. Martha donated training in self-defense and practical skills. Clara, despite being only 16, became their youngest teacher, helping other young women learn to read and write. The work was hard and often heartbreaking. They couldn't save everyone. They lost battles in the legislature and the courts. But they won too. And every woman they helped, every law they changed, every small victory reinforced their determination. As spring returned and the garden came back to life, Rowan found herself standing in the same spot where she'd married Elias a year ago, marveling at how much had changed. The frightened woman who'd stood hooded on an auction block felt like a different person, someone she could barely remember being. "Rowan," Clara called from the house. "There's someone here to see you." Rowan wiped dirt from her hands and headed inside, expecting another survivor seeking help or another reporter wanting an interview. Instead, she found a young woman waiting nervously in the parlor, her hands twisting a worn hat. "Mrs. Crow? I'm Emma. I was auctioned 2 years ago. In a different town, but the same system. When I heard about what you'd done, about the reforms," her voice broke. "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I was able to divorce the man who bought me. Because of you, I have a life again." Rowan crossed the room and took Emma's hands. "You did that. You chose freedom. I just helped make it possible. You showed us it was possible. That's everything." Emma squeezed her hands. "I'm training to be a teacher now. Going to work with girls in rural areas, make sure they know their rights before they can be tricked or forced into something terrible. Following your example." After Emma left, Rowan stood on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, feeling the weight and privilege of what she'd become. Not a victim, not anymore. Not just a survivor either. Something more. A voice, a catalyst. Proof that even the most broken among them could heal and help others heal. Elias joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "Good day?" "Good day." She leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke that would always mean home. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. That I get to do work that matters. That I have you and Clara and this whole community of women fighting for change. You built it, one choice at a time, one brave act after another." "We built it," she corrected, "all of us together." As the stars began to emerge and the cool evening breeze carried the scent of growing things from the garden, Rowan realized she'd finally found what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just safety or freedom or justice, though she had all of those now, but purpose. The knowledge that her suffering had meaning, that her survival could light the way for others still trapped in darkness. The brand on her face would never disappear. The memories of what Garrett had done would never fully fade. But those scars were part of her story now, part of the testimony she carried into the world. Proof that cruelty could be survived, that evil could be defeated, that broken people could build beautiful lives from the wreckage of their worst moments. Clara came out to join them on the porch, settling into the chair with a book and a lamp. Martha arrived with a basket of fresh bread and the latest news from the reform movement. Neighbors stopped by to chat about the upcoming harvest and the town meeting where new education policies would be discussed. This was her life now. Not dramatic or dangerous, not a constant fight for survival, just steady, purposeful, full of people she loved and work that mattered. Just exactly what she'd needed without knowing how to name it. And late that night, as Elias slept beside her and moonlight painted their bedroom in silver, Rowan traced the brand on her face one last time. Not with shame or grief, but with gratitude. Because that mark, that terrible reminder of the worst thing that had ever happened to her, had also been the catalyst for the best things. It had brought her to Elias, had sparked a movement, had given her a purpose beyond mere survival. She was Rowan Crow now, fully and completely. Not Rowan Hale marked and auctioned, not Rowan the victim, but Rowan the survivor, the reformer, the woman who'd looked at the system that tried to destroy her and said no, who'd burned it down and built something better from the ashes. The man who'd tried to own her was dead. The system that enabled him was broken. And she was alive, free, and using every day she'd been given to make sure no other woman had to endure what she'd endured. That was triumph. That was justice. That was healing. And as she drifted into peaceful sleep, Rowan understood with perfect clarity that she'd finally found what she'd been seeking all along. Not revenge, not even justice, really, but the simple, profound freedom to wake up each morning and choose who she wanted to be. The choice was hers now. It would always be hers. And that made all the difference.